Welcome to the Elder Scrolls Lore Series audiobook. Contained within is an uncut and unedited version of our Elder Scrolls Lore Series on YouTube, which you won't find anywhere else. On behalf of all the creators here at the Shoddycast, thank you for your patronage. Enjoy.
Chapter the 1st. Wolf Queen of Solitude. She was a queen and a conqueror. She controlled kingdoms and held the empire within her clenched fist. She was a fearsome enemy, hard as a war hammer, yet silent as a poisoned dagger. She attained power at the cost of many lives, and in the end ruled alone over a rotting kingdom of ashes and death. Of all the histories chronicling the rulers of Tamriel, there is none so dark as that of Boethiah Septim, the Wolf Queen of Solitude. In the 63rd year of the Third Era, Prince Pelagius Septim II, son of Empress Kintyre, slew a werewolf with the help of Princess Quintilla, a powerful sorceress. The spirit of the werewolf was trapped in a soul gem which Pelagius crafted into a ring, which he immediately used to wed Quintilla. Some believe the essence of the creature they bound passed through the ring and into the body of their first child, Boethiah. Her sullen intensity was apparent from the time she was an infant. It was her grandfather, Uriel Septim II, who would compare her to a lurking wolf ready to lunge at her prey. Boethiah discovered the virtue of deception as a young girl. She painfully realized her father had used her as a bartering chip to smooth over relations with King Maniarco of Solitude, an ally her father had cheated. After being married off to this king, Boethiah decided that the only way to protect herself from the schemes of men was to accrue power and influence at any cost, and once attained, to wield it like a weapon. As Queen of Solitude, Boethiah quickly elevated herself to a position of authority by exploiting elderly King Maniarca's affection for his pretty young wife. She would demonstrate her feelings for Maniarco by duping him into believing that his first heir was the result of an affair. Maniarco's heartache was immeasurable. He disowned the young prince, banished him from the kingdom, and in his place named the newborn son Boethiah had borne him as heir to his throne. Thus did Boethiah cement her position as the true ruler of Solitude, and she would use her son, who she also named Uriel, as a pawn all his life. Perhaps she did indeed love the boy, assuming she was capable of love at all, but when all was done, he was simply a means to her own ends. The Wolf Queen's venomous lies tormented Maniarco for the rest of his days. After a failed attempt to steal the Emperor's throne from her brother, Boethiah began to focus on the consolidation of her power as Regent of Solitude, ensured by the birthright of her pawn of a son. Many nobles visited the court in Solitude, and Boethiah wanted every single one of them to be her political puppet. To that end, she would use all the abilities she had developed over the years. Scheming, diplomacy, espionage, blackmail, bribery, and even sexuality were weapons she used to advance her only goal, to see her son Uriel crowned Emperor of all Tamriel. Her opportunity would not come for 20 years. The emperor of this age was a man by the name of Antiochus. He was obese, always intoxicated, and riddled with the marks of every sexually transmitted disease the royal physicians had been able to heal him of. It was upon his death that the Wolf Queen attempted again to capture the ruby throne. There had been speculation as to what form Boethiah's bid for the crown would take, as Antiochus' 15-year-old daughter Kintyre was expected to be crowned empress. The Wolf Queen's move was calculated and ruthless. The accusation of illegitimate birth had won her Solitude, and she used it again to sway the Elder Council's opinion against Antiochus' daughter in favor of her son Uriel. Ultimately, Boethiah shook with rage as Kintyre Septim II was crowned instead of her son Uriel. Kintyre's first act was to banish Boethiah from the imperial city before her coronation. All her plotting had led her nowhere, and Patima's frustration was immense. If she couldn't have the crown through politics and deceit, she would take it with a deluge of fire and blood. The Empire had known enemies. The Nordic nations and parts of High Rock and Morrowind continued to resist the authority of Septim rule. Patima had quietly nurtured relationships with these upstart kingdoms as dutifully as a shepherd tends his flock. Now she called upon them to unite under the banner of Solitude as the War of the Red Diamond began. Patima's plan was not only to battle Kintyre's imperial forces directly, but also to incite chaos and rebellion wherever her armies went. Before her death, Patima's mother had recast her wedding ring into an amulet endowed with a strong charm spell and powered by the soul gem which still contained the werewolf that had a hand in Patima's birth. The Wolf Queen used it to induce people to treason, further destabilizing the Empire as her army swept across Tamriel like a pestilence. Patima's ability at warfare was on a par with her capacity for deception. Her forces routed Kintyre's with strategies based on misdirection, stealth, and very often betrayal. Kintyre's troops were further demoralized by rumors that Patima was using necromancers to reanimate the broken corpses of fallen soldiers to fight for her. The Wolf Queen's operatives would often strike in dark of night, silently, leaving no trace, and sometimes no bodies. Eventually, ruthlessness allowed her to capture the warrior empress. Kintyre was strong but no match for the Wolf Queen, for whom treachery was second nature. Thus, at a stronghold in High Rock, Patima took Kintyre with deadly, soundless precision, and with her execution soon crowned Uriel Septim III, Emperor of Tamriel. After 30 years of deceit and death, Patima's son sat on the ruby throne in the imperial city, and the Wolf Queen held the empire within her hands. But in just a few short years, it would all turn to dust before her waking eyes. The Septim family denied the rule of Uriel III and by proxy Patima. Her uncles Sepphoris and Magnus attacked them relentlessly, determined to restore the true Septim dynasty. The battles raged for nearly 4 years after Uriel had assumed the throne. The people of Tamriel had loved Kintyre, and Patima failed to unite them under the mantle of her son. It took all of the Wolf Queen's effort to maintain unity among the denizens of the Empire, who were helpless victims as civil war raged around them. While Magnus focused on Solitude, Sepphoris pummeled Uriel's battle lines along High Rock. Uriel was a capable leader, but without the ruthlessness of his mother he couldn't stop Sepphoris from defeating his forces at the Battle of Ishidag. Sepphoris captured Uriel and was quickly declared emperor, as forces formerly loyal to Uriel and Patima swore allegiance to him in exchange for minimal levels of interference from the Empire. Uriel would never see the inside of Sepphoris' dungeon. A mob enraged at the man who had brought such strife to their lands intercepted the caravan transporting Uriel to Gildain and burned it to ashes with Uriel inside. And so it was that while Patima's armies drove back the forces of one Septim, the empire itself was taken by another amid Uriel's screams as he drew his final breaths. It's said that whatever humanity the Wolf Queen possessed died with her son. What remained was little more than a monster who unleashed hell on anyone unfortunate enough to cross her path. The rumors of Patima summoning Daedra and reanimating dead soldiers, once thought to be fear-mongering, proved to be truth. In her rage and grief and determination to crush Sepphoris, Patima brazenly set waves of liches, vampires, and walking corpses upon the forces of her uncle. So terrible was her wrath, so obscene the rituals her necromancers performed, that even the few supporters she retained soon fled in horror and revulsion. Her subjects defected in droves amid terrified whispers that anyone who dared defy or offend the deranged, sinister old woman was sacrificed in rites to unholy gods, or worse, drafted into service until their deaths, and beyond. Years passed. Patima's resources expired, and all who supported her either died or deserted. In the end she ruled alone over one decaying kingdom that reeked of suffering and death. She had no subjects left, save for rotting empty-eyed droggers and unearthly creatures with whom she madly conspired, believing she could again rule Tamriel even as Magnus lay a final siege on Solitude itself, determined to end Patima's menace forever. Magnus finally breached Patima's defenses, his soldiers finding only her withered corpse and those of her decomposing servants who had expired with their mistress. He named his son Pelagius as temporary ruler before returning to his own kingdom of Gildane, confident that the threat of the Wolf Queen was finished. They say that Patima took vengeance even from beyond her grave. Some say that the evil of the old woman was so great it saturated the walls of the castle and drove any who spent time there irretrievably mad. Others tell a story of an old crone who, during an encounter with a very young Pelagius Septim, presented the child with a gift of an amulet that held a soul gem that seemed to contain the image of a hungrily pacing wolf, an amulet that may or may not have held a ghastly curse. The antics of Pelagius the Mad are a matter of public record. That Pelagius slew his father Magnus whilst in the grip of a demonic frenzy before assuming the title of emperor himself, merely a rumor. Patima Septim's name lived on, as rumors of a cult of necromancers attempting to resurrect her flourished. Other anecdotes suggested the old woman rose as an undead ghoul, only to be vanquished by the dragonborn of the Fourth Era. Thus ends the dark tale of Patima, the Wolf Queen of Solitude, whose thirst for power sealed her fate. Hunger for power leads many to their doom, but others have power thrust upon them along with the obligation to use it as best they can. The title of usurper doesn't lie with Patima alone. There was once another child of Skyrim who sought a station that far exceeded his own. Chapter the 2nd. Ulfric Stormcloak. He was chosen as a child to walk the path of Jurgen Windcaller and follow the way of the voice. He was taught above all never to use his thum as a weapon, for it was most sacred and only to be used in worship of the divines. But the fires of rebellion burned within his blood, and he answered their call with a shout that shook the land of Skyrim and the empire beyond. Warrior, revolutionary, Nord. His name, Ulfric Stormcloak. The son of a Windhelm Jarl, Ulfric was chosen to study with the Greybeards at High Hrothgar from a very early age, and would spend most of the next decade developing the awesome power of his thum. It was expected that Ulfric would himself become a Greybeard one day, if it were not for the Great War of the Fourth Era. Despite the teachings of pacifism that were the cornerstone of the Way of the Voice, Ulfric was compelled to join in the fight against the elven Thalmor, who sensed the growing weakness in the empires of men. The Thalmor sought to take the world of man by storm in the name of the Aldemary Dominion. Gone were the fabled days of the magnificent Septim dynasty. The landscape of Tamriel was a patchwork of independent kingdoms who battled each other over resources and territorial disputes. High Rock and Skyrim had been most prosperous during this time, and Ulfric wished to fight to preserve the Nordic way of life, including the worship of Talos, which the Thalmor had demanded be outlawed. Joining the Imperial Legion, the young Stormcloak was powerful and brave, yet untrained in the ways of war and hesitant to use his thum in battle due to the teachings of the Greybeards. He was quickly captured in battle and subjected to the tender mercies of the Thalmor, who tortured him relentlessly for many days, making him believe the information he had finally given up had led to the fall of the White Gold Tower. In truth, the Imperial City had fallen long before Ulfric reached his threshold for pain. Shortly after the fall of Cyrodiil, he was released from prison and returned to Skyrim. With the tragic demise of his father, Ulfric found great sadness within his native land of Windhelm upon his return. With his reputation as a war hero, Ulfric Stormcloak was quickly named Jarl of Windhelm. Immediately he was approached by Jarl Igmund of Markarth, who had lost control of his territory, known as the Reach. It had been taken by savages called Reachmen, who recognized neither the authority of the Empire or the Nords. They even managed to take the city of Markarth itself. Igmund pleaded for assistance, and Ulfric agreed to assist, under the condition that the worship of Talos, which had been outlawed within the treaty that ended the Great War, be freely allowed again. Igmund agreed, and Ulfric immediately laid siege upon the city in what would become known as the Markarth Incident. It is believed Ulfric used the power of his Thum to brutally crush the rebel Reachmen and drive them again into the hills surrounding the Reach, where they would become known as the Forsworn. Jarl Igmund gratefully welcomed Talos' worship once he was able to enter the city. When the Imperial Legion arrived to bring Markarth back under Imperial rule, Ulfric refused to allow them entry into the city until free worship of Talos was assured. Desperate to restore order to a city that had sunk into murderous anarchy, the Legion agreed. Order was restored, and all was well for a while. The Empire, desperate to maintain peace with the Aldmeri Dominion, was all too happy to break their word. Thus, Ulfric, along with his fighting men, was soon driven out of the city of Markarth by Imperial troops. Ulfric's resentment was enormous. He felt betrayed by an empire he and many other Nords had fought so hard and sacrificed so much for. It is here, by all accounts, that the Stormcloak Rebellion began. Ulfric's position came to be one of secession. He reasoned that because the Empire was now essentially a subject of the Thalmor and the Aldmeri Dominion, to remain under Imperial authority was to be an underling to an underling. He began to believe that Nords would only be truly free when all of Skyrim was purged of Imperial rule. Over time, he became increasingly nationalistic in his views. Some accused his policies of being outright racist. He is known for having segregated the Dunmer living in Windhelm to the Grey Quarter slums, as well as for refusing to allow Argonians to live within the city walls at all. Despite Ulfric's call for all the Nords of Skyrim to secede from the Empire, he managed to coexist for a time with his imperial overseers, but that would soon change. Ulfric's unsteady relationship with the Empire collapsed completely when he openly killed the High King of Skyrim. Ulfric and his supporters maintain it was a formal duel meant to illustrate just how weak Skyrim had grown under Imperial rule, and how essential it was for Nords to split from the Empire. Ulfric claims High King Torrig accepted his challenge, and it is reasonable to assume Torrig would have had to, for to do otherwise would not only have been humiliating, it would have proven Ulfric's point all the same. Some have called it a duel in the old Nord way, and thus an honorable kill. Then there are those, such as General Tullius of the Empire, who claimed Ulfric literally shouted Torrig to pieces, condemning it as an act of cold-blooded murder and an attempt to usurp the crown of the High King for himself. In any event, orders for Ulfric's arrest were issued immediately, and for the next few months Ulfric was confined to the boundaries of Windhelm. Ultimately he was duped and led into a trap at Darkwater Crossing, where he quietly and peacefully surrendered. Whereas General Tullius would have seen the Nord leader extradited to Cyrodiil to face murder charges, plans were inexplicably changed, and it was decreed that Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak would be transported to Helgen and executed immediately. Perhaps it was just coincidence, the events of that day, for as the legions of the Empire prepared to execute not one but two speakers of the dragon tongue, a great beast came soaring out of the skies, raining fire and death down on Helgen, and allowing these two people of great power to escape with their lives. The prisoner who escaped Helgen has gone on to give us hope in a time when dragons appear to have returned in force to consume the world of man with elemental fury. Jarl Ulfric simply went home to Windhelm to rule his land as he had before. Their paths have crossed several times since, these two warriors, but where their respective fates will lead them, and if they will ever meet again, remains to be seen. Meanwhile, the rebel Stormcloaks continue to fight fiercely for Skyrim's independence and the right to openly worship Talos as their forefathers did, unwavering in their resolve to decide their own destinies, free from imperial rule or Thalmor interference. They fight for their freedom, they fight for justice, and to honor the blood of their fallen kinsmen, and they fight because they believe in Ulfric Stormcloak, who they believe to be the true High King. The final chapter in the life of this controversially influential man is yet to be written. Some say he should lead Skyrim into its next golden age. Others fear him and wish him dead. Still others, like the barbaric Forsworn, fight to see the Empire, the Thalmor, and the Nords all banished from Skyrim. Stealthy, savage, and cruel, their actions have created chaos and fear across a land they believe to be their own. Ulfric and his Stormcloaks were not the first revolutionaries willing to spill blood to shed an imperial yoke. There was once a red eagle who was so compelling he would inspire men even from beyond the grave. Chapter the 3rd. The Forsworn. They are described as either savage berserkers swarming over the hills of the Reach with war cries on their lips, or unseen anarchists plotting terror in secret and striking from the shadows. But what is actually known of the group of insurgents known as the Forsworn? Who are they? Where have they come from? What do they want? And how have they grown from a scattering of defeated rebels to the highly organized group of radicals they are today? Millennia ago, in a part of the Reach known then as the Sundered Hills, there was a child born who prophecy said would be a warrior without measure and a great ruler of men. He was named Feolan, meaning red eagle, after the redness of the hills of the Reach in autumn, and the bird of prey whose scream could be heard when he was born. The prophecy came to pass, and Feolan grew to be a great leader who united what were at the time the 10 kings of the Reach. Under the banner of the Red Eagle, Feolan came to be known far and wide for his courage and ferocity in battle. For a time all was well, until Empress Hestra of Cyrodiil invaded the Reach in the name of the Elysian Empire of Men, and one by one the kings of the Reach knelt in submission, or were butchered, along with all those who stood with him. When his time came, Feolan himself would not yield. The elders of his kingdom, having seen the fate of those who had failed to surrender, were not so brave. So great was their fear of the Empress's military strength that they turned on Feolan and cast him out, swearing loyalty to Hestra and to the Empire. Still the Red Eagle would not surrender, and over the years he gathered Reachmen who would fight Hestra and her legions with stealth and cunning. Yet for all the blows he struck against the Empire's forces, more would emerge to do battle. He fought with all he had, and when he had no more left to give, he cut out his own heart from his chest and offered it to a Hagraven as a sacrifice in return for the power to slay his enemies. As a result, Feolan became a spirit of vengeance and rained hell down on the Empire and her people. Wielding a great flaming sword, he faced Hestra and her armies and slew them all, over 1,000 in a single day. Ultimately, the Red Eagle fell dead from his wounds, but not before giving his mighty sword to the people of the Reach, along with a promise. When the Reach was free of all foreign invaders, he would arise and return to lead his people once again. Time went on, and the Reachmen lingered until the Great War of the Fourth Era. In the heat of the conflict between the Empire under Titus Mede and the Aldmeri Dominion, troops from all across the land were summoned to fight. This included most of the garrisons from the Reach, stationed in the nearest city of Markarth. For many centuries, the native Bretons of High Rock had intermarried with the Nords of Skyrim, and had in time created a unique bloodline and culture with elements based on both Nord and Breton principles, yet truly belonging to neither. There had been many disputes throughout the years over the lucrative gold and silver mines in the area known as the Reach, and this hybrid race of Reachmen had grown to hate the Nords. They considered them to be invaders, stealing resources rightfully owned by the true sons and daughters of the Reach, and were committed to purging the area of all but themselves, even as they had millennia ago under the banner of the Red Eagle. With most of the Imperial Guards of Markarth diverted to battle with the forces of the Thalmor, the city of Markarth was taken easily by the fierce and brutal Reachmen who rebelled from within the city walls and were quickly joined by those from the surrounding areas. The Reachmen drove the Nords away and would hold the city for over 2 years, as the Great War played out, and the Empire was unable to divert forces to deal with the uprising of the indigenous people. Enter Ulfric Stormcloak, Nordic son of Skyrim and a war hero besides. As newly appointed Jarl of Windhelm, he was asked to assist with the retaking of the city of Markarth by Jarl Igmund. Ulfric and a militia of fighting men who would soon be known as the Stormcloaks, sacked the city in a bloody, brutal assault that has come to be known as the infamous Markarth Incident. There was no quarter given, and any who were suspected of assisting in the initial rebellion were viciously slaughtered. There are some who say there were attempts at peace on the part of the Reachmen that were ignored by both Ulfric and Igmund, both in favor of wholesale killing, but that is mostly hearsay, and generally accepted as unverified. The leader of the Reachmen, Madanach, was captured, but not executed, in the belief he was worth more as a living hostage than as a dead martyr. The surviving Reachmen were driven into the hills to be joined by other Bretons who had witnessed the massacre or lost loved ones. These Bretons bitterly decided to join the hillmen, to take arms against the murderous invaders as their hero, Phaelan the Red Eagle, had done before them. Once they had been banished from Markarth, the Forsworn took up residence in the hills again, at any location considered both hospitable and defendable. The Forsworn are fiercely resolved to drive all occupiers from what they feel are their ancestral lands, and have become experts at guerrilla warfare and surprise terrorist attacks designed to instill fear into the hearts of the Nords and non-Bretons. The Forsworn are sustained by a sort of religious fervor, and worship several Daedric entities, known to them as Et'ada, or Old Gods, who scholars actually believe to be Azura and Hircine the Hunter. Higher-level Forsworn have been rumored to sanctify themselves by offering their actual hearts to their revered hag ravens in return for becoming an unstoppable destructive force, as had first been done by Phaelan. These arcane rituals are designed to turn ordinary Forsworn into the personification of vengeance, or briar hearts. The fearsome, partly undead creatures are either melee fighters or magic users, always male and always deadly. In combat, the Forsworn are known for having an unmatched skill for dual-wielding weapons, such as short swords or war axes. The archers are particularly deadly, as Forsworn bows are considered to be among the most powerful bows in the world for their size. Organized into a collection of independent cells, the Forsworn are believed to have infiltrated the ranks of city dwellers by blending into society in dress and conduct, as opposed to their usual appearance of fur-clad barbarians wielding weapons made of bone and animal skin, for the purpose of causing chaos and disarray from within. There are thought to be sleeper cells entrenched in every level of Markarth society, awaiting orders or just an opportunity to strike. Because of the actions of the rebel Forsworn, there are many bounty hunters who make their living solely by tracking down Forsworn leaders and operatives and bringing them to justice. The Silverblood family has taken particular pains to root out the Forsworn and their operatives, since their allegiance lies firmly with Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak. It is believed by some that the Forsworn have retaliated by placing covert agents within Silverblood businesses and domestic staff, waiting for an opportunity to decimate the Silverblood clan from within. The Forsworn continue to be a real and very present threat in the city of Markarth and its surrounding areas. The fact that they have seamlessly integrated themselves into the fabric of Markarth city life is a sinister indication that at some point another Markarth incident could occur. While relatively small in number, their desire to see all non-Bretons driven from the Reach is fanatical, and when combined with the powerful magics and weapons they have at their disposal, enemies such as the Forsworn are a frighteningly potent danger. With increasingly bolder and deadlier attacks, they long for the day when all those not of the Reach are dead or exiled, so that Phaelan the fabled Red Eagle may once again return to lead his people to prosperity and greatness. Meanwhile, they strive to live in harmony with the land their ancestors have occupied for centuries untold. They hunt as their forefathers did, in the spirit of one of their primary deities, Hircine, whose feral nature resonates with the untamed essence of the Forsworn. The legend of the Daedric prince Hircine is the story of the hunt and of the savage beast that lies within the darkest depths of the souls of all men. Chapter the 4th. Hircine. Your heart pounds in your chest as the sweat runs cold down your back. The light you see is too bright and too vivid. Smells you would never have noticed before are suddenly overpowering, and the smallest sounds are deafening. There is fear, then disorientation and agonizing pain as your bones lengthen and your body contorts, then finally the urge to hunt and the all-consuming lust for blood. You run close to the ground with the air burning your lungs. Your claws are razors, your teeth daggers. Conscious thought fades. You are his now, his hound. His commands burn within your mind as you howl your despair at the blood-red moon. The hunt of Hircine has begun, and you will kill tonight. He is the father of lycanthropy, and the originator of the great hunt. He is the father of man-beasts, and the huntsman of the princes. All those who hunt pay tribute to him. He is the Daedric prince Hircine. The earliest reference of Hircine is a written encounter between him and the mad god Shade Perilous, who summoned Hircine to the snowy peaks of Skyrim. As is his inclination, Shade Perilous wished to amuse himself, and thus challenged Hircine to a contest to determine who between them could create the deadliest creature in 3 years' time. Hircine knew of Shade Perilous' love of mischief, but believed the mad god could surely be no match for him. Using his power over lycanthropy, Hircine created a particularly nasty Daedroth. This beast was a nightmare creature of such savagery and dread, its horror remains unrivaled, even to this day. Hircine strode confidently onto the battlefield with his handiwork. As Shade Perilous leaned against a stone, seemingly unconcerned, the mad god walked away to reveal his champion. A tiny, colorful bird, scarcely the length of a finger. Unleashing his creation, Hircine was smug as the snarling monster obliterated the stone the bird had perched upon. Hircine's beast roared in triumph, seemingly unaware that it had in fact missed its target. It was then that the little bird landed upon the beast's snout. The monster blinded itself, trying to use its awful strength to smash Sheogorath's champion, even as the tiny creature chirped and flitted about, effortlessly avoiding the maddened brute. In the end, Hircine's creation literally tore itself apart, trying to kill the little bird, who escaped unharmed. Thoroughly beaten, Hircine returned to his Plane of Oblivion, the hunting grounds, where he burned his dead creature and pondered his loss. It is one of the few accounts in which Hircine has known the taste of defeat. Another notable account of Hircine comes from the folklore of the Skull of Solstheim, who speak of the terror and carnage of the Blood Moon prophecy and the hunt of Hircine. The Daedric princes have a bad habit of meddling in the affairs of mortals, and more times than not, someone gets hurt. Some time ago, omens appeared that heralded the approach of the huntsman god, beginning with the coming of werewolves who prowled Solstheim, killing human and animal alike, which was followed by a blazing gout of flame that burned on frozen Lake Fjalding. The hunt continued, with the deaths of hawkers washed up on the shore, and culminated with a full moon turning red as blood. An entire tribe of Skull was kidnapped and taken to Hircine's realm to be hunted down by his werewolf hounds. It was only by Hircine's later defeat in single combat, at the hands of a mere mortal, that Hircine's attempt to enter the mortal realm was defeated. Despite the popular belief that the Daedric princes are out to cause nothing but pain and misery in the mortal realm, Hircine does not seem to revel in the destruction of mortals for its own sake. He operates by a very strict code of honor and ethics. As a Daedric prince, he is neither entirely evil nor good. He considers the taking of souls through lycanthropy a sacred gift, though the recipients of his gift might tend to disagree. Hircine's werewolves are monstrous beasts with an insatiable hunger, cursed to walk known as both hunter and prey. Now, like his kin, Hircine is known to bestow powerful artifacts to individuals willing to act as his mortal puppets. One of Hircine's most well-known endowments has been the artifact known as the Kuras of Saviour's Hide, though there are differing stories regarding its origin and properties. It is widely believed that there is a full set of Saviour's Hide armor, but only the Kuras has been seen since the middle of the Third Era. There are suggestions that the Kuras, along with the rest of the armor, was created by Malakath, but a more believable account is that the magic-resistant Kuras was crafted from the hide of Hircine, which he peeled from his body himself and bestowed upon the only mortal to ever survive all aspects of the Great Hunt and the Blood Moon prophecy. The Kuras is also necessary to wield the Spear of Bitter Mercy, a particularly mysterious item which is currently on display at the Museum of Artifacts in Mournhold. Hircine has regained possession of the Kuras on more than one occasion, using it to reward mortals who please him, as he did for the champion of Cyrodiil, who was tasked with bringing the huntsman the horn of a unicorn. Another of Hircine's artifacts that has seen more than its share of notoriety is an unassuming trinket called the Ring of Hircine. It is believed to have been kept by a Skull leader, Thorsten Hardfang, for a great many years, allowing him to extend his vigor and vitality far beyond his normal span, though scholars believe he may have lost the ring for a time during the events known as the Warp in the West. After Hardfang was slain by the Nerevarin, the ring left Hardfang's possession and found its new master with the Nerevarin, who then faced and defeated Hircine. The Daedric prince, having been bested honorably and in fair combat, has not since manifested in such a spectacular manner. We next encounter him over 200 years later, during the time of the last Dragonborn. In the early part of the Fourth Era, near the town of Falkreath, a Nord werewolf named Sinding stole the ring of Hircine in an attempt to control his transformations. Hircine was offended at the man's insolence. To be a werewolf was to be Hircine's chosen, and to deny that gift was sacrilege. In his anger, Hircine cursed the ring, removing its protections against the inherent bloodlust that was the cornerstone of lycanthropy, and making Sinding's transformations both more often and completely random. In addition, Hircine made it impossible for the man to remove the ring unless it was given to someone who would accept it voluntarily. In no time, Sinding had transformed and killed again, this time a young girl. He was quickly captured, imprisoned, and sentenced to death. It was during this time Sinding met the Dragonborn, and pleaded with the Dovahkiin to take the ring and free it from its curse by hunting a magnificent white stag. The thrill of the hunt honors Hircine, and it was Hircine himself who had demanded this from Sinding, and now Sinding was asking the Dragonborn to perform it instead. The Dragonborn accepted, took the ring, which immediately bonded itself to the Dovahkiin's finger, and hunted the animal down for the sake of the guilt-ridden Sinding. Upon doing so, Hircine approached the Dragonborn through the spirit of the great white stag. Hircine was still wrathful, and refused to forgive the tortured Nord. He demanded the Dragonborn hunt down Sinding and take his very hide for his betrayal of Hircine's gift. It is common knowledge that the Dragonborn did track the werewolf from the Falkreath jail he escaped from to Bloated Man's grotto in the hills of Falkreath Hold, where he concealed himself, but it is from there that accounts diverge, and we may never know what became of poor Sinding. There has not been a blood moon since the Third Era, and the Nords in Sol's time have not as of yet reported any of the frightening omens that foreshadow the imminent coming of Hircine and the savagery and bloodshed of his great hunt. Hircine's artifacts continue to roam the globe, appearing at times to do so of their own will. The assortment of werebeasts who prowl the darkest recesses of Tamriel continue to flourish and spread their own variety of terror in the name of Hircine, the father of man-beasts. Many denizens of Nirn consider Hircine's influence on the world of man and Mer as good and necessary. Some believe he safeguards the fragile balance of nature, the delicate, ever-shifting line separating the roles of predator and prey. Like all Daedra, Hircine is not bound by the fragile morals of men. Their moral ambiguity has given more than one Daedric prince the freedom to reshape Nirn in their own image. There are few so malevolent in their intent as the cruel and sinister Molag Bal, who with little motive other than spite unleashed a curse upon the world so horrific he is considered the father of vampires and the harvester of souls. Chapter the 5th. Molag Bal. She was young the night she was ravaged. She was innocent and guileless, with a simple, honest beauty that would have served her well over the course of her life. She was taken brutally, defiled without mercy, and left dying by the side of the road, with the only evidence being a single drop of blood upon her forehead. So savage was her violation, her agonized screams are said to resonate still as the shrieking winds that can be heard when the moon hangs just right over the land of Skyrim. Found by nomads, she was brought to their village, and her terrible injuries tended to for nearly 2 weeks, but to no avail. Once life had left her, the wise women of the village wrapped her in the vestments of the dead, and a bonfire was lit to cremate her broken body in the ancient way of the nomad. As the flames touched her, she awoke, and sat upon those who had tried and failed to rescue her. In life she had been gentle. In death she was monstrous. The violence of her own assault paled, in contrast to the carnage she unleashed upon the nomad camp. She ripped out the throats of the women with her teeth, and gorged on their steaming blood with hungry animalistic snarls. She laughed murderously as she plucked out the eyes of their terrified, wailing children and ate them whole, before finally turning her attention to the men. She violated them as mercilessly as she herself had been violated, and their tortured cries lasted long into the night. No life remained in the village as she strode soundless into the dark, drenched in blood and lit by the lurid glow of her own funeral pyre. Where she walked, death would follow. In the millennia to come, her name would be spoken only in terrified whispers. Lame Beolfag, she who is the brood mother of the vampire and matron of the undead. Who had the power to turn this innocent lamb into an abomination and taker of life? Whose thirst for blood and dominance is so great? The woman's defiler was the Daedric prince Molag Bal, the god of schemes, harvester of souls, and father of vampires. Molag Bal is the Daedric lord of enslavement and domination, whose sole purpose is to spread conflict and contention among mortals. His defilement of Lame Beolfag and the subsequent creation of the vampire menace was directly intended to spite the god Arche of the Nine Divines, whom Molag Bal resented for holding sway over the eventual deaths of all things that lived. Through the centuries, vampire bloodlines split and acquired characteristics unique to each clan, but all originate in that first defilement of Lame Beolfag. Molag Bal enjoys not only the sadness Arche feels for the foul and perverse imitations of life, but also the chaos and misery the immortal creatures bring to the existence of man and Mer. This is but one of the ways Molag Bal incites suffering among living beings, in his never-ending quest to subvert and collect the souls of mortals. He has at times murdered mortals directly, as he did to all those in the Bosmerry town of Gilverdale, wiping it away in a red mist, for the sake of an insane king. It has been written that as the rolling crimson fog erased everything and everyone in its path, Molag Bal strode along in front of it, a red-skinned giant that laughed heartily amid the screams of the doomed. Although Molag Bal appears to revel in the destruction of mortals, he much prefers to warp them into his own twisted image. One of Molag Bal's most inhuman moments was the breaking of the good and honorable Mellus Petilius, an imperial champion. Petilius had sworn to never again raise a weapon after the tragic death of his wife Vina. His unshakable valor, deep conviction, and life of courageous selflessness was most offensive to Molag Bal, who thrived in the degradation and corruption of the mortal spirit. Rather than see this righteous man dead, Molag Bal wished to see him damned. The Daedric lord assigned a mortal the task of goading Mellus Petilius to the point of murder. Molag Bal knew that the man could never tolerate disrespect at the gravesite of his beloved wife, and made sure there was a cursed mace near the guilt-ridden widower when the mortal fulfilled his charge and drove Petilius to raise the weapon against him. Broken of both oath and spirit, Mellus Petilius lived the rest of his days in anguish as a haunted and broken man. Ruining a mortal life by taking away their very faith is Molag Bal's greatest pleasure. Of particular interest to the Dark Elves, Molag Bal has come to be considered one of the four corners of the House of Troubles to the Dunmer, particularly in the land of Morrowind. They believe Molag Bal and the three other Daedric lords, cunning Malakath, infernal Mehrunes Dagon, and the demented Sheogorath, exist, each in their own way, to test the mettle of the Dunmer, and as such, the Dark Elves choose to endure their malice. Molag Bal's disregard for life extends even to his own flesh and blood. From his union with Vivek, the Daedric prince created a daughter named Molag Grunda, a winged twilight who dared to fall in love with a relatively unimportant Frost Atronach. Due to his contempt of the Atronach and displeasure at their union, Molag Bal attempted to have them both murdered. It would be much easier to torture his child's spirit once it was forcibly removed from her body and returned to the realm of Cold Harbor. The status of Molag Grunda and her lover are unknown as of the time of this writing. Like each Daedra lord, Molag Bal has procured a Daedric artifact that serves as a conduit for his will on Nirn. At some point, he created an artifact known as the Mace of Molag Bal, or simply the Vampire's Mace. Apparently designed after the nature of his minions, the mace is enchanted with a spell that drains the life energy of an opponent and transfers it to the wielder. Molag Bal has been exceedingly free with the weapon, and it has been possessed and used many times over the years, including during the events of the Warp in the West, where it was used to slay a powerful wizard. No matter where the mace finds itself, it has represented its master well. Molag Bal's Plane of Oblivion is known as Cold Harbor, and it is a perfect reflection of the Daedric prince himself. It is a frightening place of slag, burning skies, and freezing air. But the truly eerie thing about Cold Harbor is the fact that it surrounds a mirror version of Nirn, including Tamriel and the Imperial Palace. The only difference between this Nirn and the real one is that it is a desecrated, decaying place washed in blood and smeared with excrement. Daedroths roam freely, and are counted as servants to Molag Bal, along with the legions of anguished souls he's gathered. Bal's thirst to defile everything good and fair on Nirn is unquenchable. There came a turbulent time in Tamriel's history, when Molag Bal attempted to merge his realm with the mortal realm, a time when the races of men and Mer slaughtered each other over a crumbling kingdom. Many a hero would be forged during this time of adversity, and be called upon to stop Molag Bal's threat against the world of the living. But that story has yet to be written. Molag Bal continues to be a force of strife and misery in a world already mired in suffering. He revels in corruption and death, and encourages the behavior of his vampiric minions in their obscene rituals and horrific acts of rape, mutilation, and murder. He is the prince of domination and enslavement, and as such, he often comes into conflict with another Daedric prince, a prince whose very nature is to encourage treason and revolt against authority. Such discord is familiar ground to the Daedric prince of treachery and the lord of plots. Like Molag Bal, Boethiah revels in the suffering of mortals, and has for millennia tormented Mer and men alike. Boethiah's violent and tumultuous influence has changed history and has determined the destiny of empires. Chapter the 6th. Boethiah. Deceiver, Devourer, Queen, Goddess. Boethiah is the Daedric prince of deceit, treachery, insurrection, and rebellion against lawful authority. Considered one of the most violent of the princes, she demands blood, combat, and very often outright murder to appease her appetites and gain her favor. Her followers believe any mortals haven't proven themselves worthy of her attention until they've taken a life. This sinister reputation has marked as one of the evil Daedra, save for the Dunmer, who revere her. Indeed, much like her supposed rival, the intensely malevolent Molag Bal, Boethiah delights in the agony and deaths of those on the mortal plane. Those who follow her do so expressly aware that they are no more than playthings for the amusement of the Daedric prince, and that at any time Boethiah may demand their blood, or that of another at their hands. Gender means nothing to the princes. Male and female are mortal concepts. Boethiah has been portrayed as both genders at her various shrines. In Cyrodiil and Morrowind, shrines dedicated to Boethiah portray her as a strong-caped warrior wielding a giant battle-axe. In Skyrim, her shrine resembles a rather sinister-looking woman brandishing a blade. Her followers come from many corners of Tamriel to worship at these shrines, but as mentioned before, the Dark Elves are counted among her most devout cultists. Scholars agree that Boethiah, in conjunction with Azura and Mephala, is responsible for the emergence of the Dunmer as a distinct race. The ancestors of these dark elves were known as the Chimer, who themselves were descended from the ancient High Elven Altmer. As the preamble to the Dark Elves, the Chimer had been chosen to abandon the laws and customs of the Somerset Isles at the behest of Boethiah. We can be certain that this insurrection and rebellion of the Chimer pleased the Daedric mistress. The exodus of the Chimer is shrouded in mystery. Some historians say Boethiah had battled and defeated the Altmer god Trinimac, and in the end devoured him. Then, speaking with Trinimac's own voice, she convinced these upstarts to leave their home and follow the prophet Veleth, finally settling in Risdane, which would come to be known as Morrowind. Whether this legend of ages past is true, Boethiah is acknowledged by the world at large to be responsible for most aspects of Dunmer philosophy, magic, and architecture. Despite Boethiah's contempt for the lives of mortals, she came to be considered one of the good Daedra, along with Mephala and Azura. Later, when the Dark Elves submitted themselves to the rule and authority of the tribunal, these princes were all but cast aside, their shrines falling into disrepair. Following the later fall of the tribunal, Boethiah was again elevated to primary worship in the land of Morrowind. The realm of Boethiah in Oblivion is known alternately as Attribution's Share or Snake Mount. It has been depicted as a place of labyrinths, maze gardens, and twisted towers. It is where Boethiah's contest, the Tournament of 10 Bloods, has been carried out for millennia. A one-on-one battle to the death, the Tournament of 10 Bloods is an arena-style contest fought between the 10 major races of Tamriel: Bretons, Imperials, Nords, Redguards, Altmer, Bosmer, Dunmer, Orcs, Argonians, Khajiit. One representative from each race battles to the death to win the favor of Boethiah, and the prize is one of her sought-after artifacts, such as Goldbrand, which has been awarded to a hero of Cyrodiil in the Third Era, and was offered to a hero in Morrowind at an earlier time in exchange for the erection of a new shrine in Vardenfell. Goldbrand takes the form of a golden katana, which is said to have been created by dragons and empowered by Boethiah. It is rumored that Goldbrand played a key part in the Battle of the Red Ring against the Altmeri Dominion. In this battle, the Empire launched an assault to retake the Imperial City, which had fallen to the Thalmor. Reports from the battle indicate that Goldbrand was wielded by Emperor Titus Mede II, and with it, he and his Imperials drove the Elven menace from their city. Only rumor, though, unverified by the Imperial government, who probably doesn't want their citizens thinking their Emperor is a secret Daedra worshipper. There is another legend of an artifact of Boethiah known as Fearstruck, that took the form of a shield which belonged to the hero Lyrisias, who is known for having fought against Akaviri slavers. Sadly, for artifact collectors everywhere, the shield was thought to be destroyed by the breath of a worm Lyrisias encountered in his journeys. Aside from the legend of Lyrisias, no account of this artifact exists. The most notable of Boethiah's artifacts is without doubt the Ebony Male. It may well be among the most powerful artifacts in existence, according to some experts. At one time, the Eternal Champion possessed the Male, having retrieved it from the Black Marsh after Boethiah lost favor with Helath Stormbinder, the previous owner of the powerful magic armor. Anecdotes indicate the Ebony Male's enchantments have changed over time. When Tholo Saraione, archcanon of the Temple of the Tribunal, sent a hero on a pilgrimage to Mount Asarnibibi, the hero was rewarded with the Ebony Male. At the time, the artifact featured a constant shielding, as well as a resistance to both fire and magicka. Yet, when the artifact reappeared during the time of the last Dragonborn, the Ebony Male carried different enchantments that nullified most magic-based attacks, muffled noise, and exuded a poison that injured anyone within a certain radius of the wearer. The reasons behind the variations in the armor's enchantments over time have never been explained. Boethiah and Her Devotees function according to a simple edict. It is actions and the will to make them that are deserving of merit. Words, be they sermons, titles, platitudes, or pleas, are hollow and worthy only of contempt. Indeed, pleas for mercy often incite the Daedric goddess of sedition to even greater acts of cruelty. She cares not at all for her worshippers, other than to enjoy their suffering and destruction, as evidenced by her actions. Her tournament, intended for her amusement, always reveals the strongest warriors of the period, setting them apart with her favor and her artifacts, until her interest wanes again. Ultimately, she turns upon her champions in anticipation of another, stronger mortal to serve her own nefarious ends. The limits of Boethiah's cruelty has known no boundaries. She continues to be a source of anguish and suffering amongst the lands of mortals. Many would assume Boethiah's deeds have no greater purpose outside of her own amusement, and while there is some truth to this, she has clearly taken steps to reshape Nirn in her own image. Her actions not only helped give birth to the Dark Elves, but the Orcs owe their plight to Boethiah's hand as well. It was from the remains of Trinimac that another prince would come into existence, a Daedric prince who would be seen as an outcast among his own kind. The Orcs revere him as the god of the spurned and the ostracized, keeper of the sworn oath and bloody curse. Chapter the 7th, Malakath. Some gods are born, others are made, and yet others are damned, such as it was with the elven god Trinimac. There came a time in Tamriel's distant past when the elves of the Somerset Isles grew restless. The Daedric lord Boethiah, who had stoked the fires of resentment within their hearts, encouraged the elven Chimer to break away from their brothers and sisters and forge a new land for themselves. The hero god Trinimac, whom these elves had worshipped for a time, took great offense at the words of Boethiah and stood to bar their way to stop the Daedra's venomous words from dividing his people. It was then that Boethiah herself materialized and did fierce battle with Trinimac, ultimately defeating the warrior god, and according to some accounts, going so far as to literally devour him. When it was over, Boethiah spoke to the Chimer with Trinimac's own voice, and encouraged the renegade elves to move boldly forward and forge for themselves a new destiny. Thus, what we would call Morrowind came to be. That was not the end for Trinimac, however. The remains of the fallen god were transformed with spasms of rage, shame, and dishonor. Out of this horrific transformation, the Daedric prince we call Malakath, god of the spurned and ostracized, took shape. After rubbing the remains of Trinimac upon their bodies, Trinimac's own followers were changed as well. They became the Orsimer. the pariah folk, commonly referred to as orcs. Millennia passed. Detested as cruel and violent savages at best, and feral beastmen at worst, the orcs have used their strength, ferocity, and mastery of the arts of war to carve out a life for themselves. The most traditional of orcs live in strongholds apart from man and mer, in accordance with their devotion to Malakath. Despite being loved and revered by most orcs, in the late Third Era there was a splinter group of orcs living in the capital of Orsinium who maintained that Malakath was in fact a false god and a demon. Soon a priesthood was established that was devoted to the living god Trinimac and committed to the belief that the demon Malakath exists solely to ensure the orcs remain outsiders forevermore. Their words and ideas were considered heresy by the overwhelming majority of orcs, and as such, many in Orsinium live in fear of the day the foul and terrible Malakath comes to destroy them. Because of Malakath's origins, the other Daedric princes seemed to disregard him. The scorning of his status amongst his peers is curiously appropriate considering his sphere of influence. Malakath represents the outcast, the exile, the downtrodden and abandoned. It only makes sense he should suffer the same. The Plane of Oblivion, where Malakath dwells, is known as the Ash Pit. It is assumed that it came into existence alongside Malakath himself. Like the other pockets of Oblivion, it seems to mirror the persona of its master and is comprised accordingly. It is characterized as a place of betrayal, emptiness, anguish, and broken promises, where the atmosphere is ash, and mortals cannot survive without magical assistance. Still, as was recorded in the Fourth Era, the Ash Pit contains one sanctuary where mortals may safely traverse. This pocket of the Ash Pit has been described as an echo of something that once was. In this place resides a thicket of slender trees with endless vines of lily-like flowers wound about their trunks. Here the sky is colorless and has an eerie way about it. The location appears to hold great emotional attachment for Malakath, and is believed to be a garden devoted to the memory of the god Trinimac, from whose tortured remains Malakath did rise. This belief has never been substantiated. Malakath is considered one of the four corners of the Dunmer House of Troubles, along with Mehrunes Dagon, Molag Bal, and the mad god Sheogorath. It was these four Daedric princes who refused to recognize the authority of the immensely powerful tribunal, and thus became great sources of strife and discontent amongst the five great houses of the Dunmer, as Malakath and his kin actively sought to undermine the divine rulership of the renegade man-gods. The Dark Elves view Malakath as a force by which they are physically tested and thus made strong. It is true that Malakath revels in combat and greatly enjoys watching mortals battle each other to the death. Despite his reputation for ferocity and conflict, however, he is renowned for his great sense of honor and deep level of affection and concern for his followers, particularly the Orsimer. As such, the majority of orcs remain fiercely loyal to him, despite Malakath's often extreme methods. He is said to relish in the death of the weak and careless, because like many Daedric princes, he recognizes strength, and will often reward mortals with his powerful artifacts. The Daedric artifact, Volendrung, has fooled many mortals by camouflaging itself as a mundane, unenchanted warhammer. It has appeared at pivotal points in history, such as during the wars of the Imperial Simulacrum and later, during the chaos of the events known as the Warp in the West. Before Malakath had influence over the weapon, however, it is said that the hammer was originally created by the ingenious Dwemer. This weapon originally belonged to the chieftain of the Rurkan Dwemer clan. In Dwarven mythology, his clan had refused to join the rest of the Dwemer when they allied themselves with Boethiah's Chimer. The chieftain was said to have thrown the Volendrang hammer across Tamriel, promising to settle wherever it landed. The hammer landed in the western corner of the continent, and thus the land we call Hammerfell came to be. How Malakath came to possess Volendrang after the Dwemer is unknown. What is known is that the hammer now embodies the power of Malakath as one of his most sought-after relics. A lesser-known artifact imparted to mortals from Malakath is the mace called Scourge. Also known as the Bane of Daedra, this brutal weapon is dedicated to the banishment of Daedra for the sake of man and Mer. Should it be used on any Daedra, they are immediately banished to the void that exists outside of the known realms. Scourge has the ability to not only exile monsters to the emptiness of the void, it can also summon Daedra, such as Dramara, to act on the wielder's behalf. Used to vanish the minions of Mehrunes Dagon and to battle the Daedra lords in the name of the Septim dynasty, the Daedric Scourge has come into play any time the realm of Oblivion has threatened Mundus. The artifact is believed to still wander the land in the possession of various adventurers who seek to banish Daedra from their worlds. Malakath continues to be regarded as one of the more evil of Daedric princes, and is considered loathsome and despicable, as are his followers, the barbaric and deeply mistrusted orcs. It is his bloodlust and outright hostility that marks him as among the most violent and vicious of the lords residing in Oblivion. Yet this supposed abomination has also repeatedly shown mercy, valor, and great concern both for his disciples and for the mortals residing on Nirn. Malakath tends to the needs of his children, the orcs, and of all those who have been rejected by society. It is this combination of malicious sadism and paternal concern that is the cornerstone of the relationship between the Daedric princes and the mortals they preside over. This blend of deep affection and venomous scorn are also close friends to the Prince of Dusk and Dawn. She, too, has shown both compassion and limitless fury to those who displease her. Like Malakath himself, she has permanently marked the denizens of Tamriel in her own way, going so far as to help create a new people, race, and culture. Chapter the 8th, Azura. Considered to be one of the three good Daedra of Morrowind, along with Dark Mephala and the savage Boethiah, Azura is regarded as one of the more benevolent of the Daedric lords. It is true that her actions have been useful to the various causes of mortals on many occasions over the recorded history of Nirn. But to deem Azura's motivations to be good as opposed to evil in the way that mortals understand these concepts is a most dangerous delusion to have. In contrast to actions of compassion and kindness on her part, have been episodes of a fearsome, pitiless rage cut through with a streak of pure spite. That malice has in the past been visited upon unfortunate beings. This is never more evident than in the accounts relating to the emergence of the Dark Elves. The story of Lord Induril Nerevar of the Chimer, and the reasons he laid siege on the Red Mountain stronghold of his old friend and rival Dumak Dwarf King, chieftain of the Dwemer, are well known and a matter of public record. It would not do to recount the tale here, but There is a very old fable told around the cook fires late at night that speaks of how a very old, very wise Dwemer once duped the all-knowing, all-understanding Azura with a feat of simple sleight of hand. At the end of his life, this old dwarf was consumed with the question of the upper limits of divine power. He needed to know if mortals held the reins of their own destinies, or if the gods truly were the masters of all mortal things. The shrewd old Dwemer devised a plan to discover this most basic of truths, even if it meant his own life. With the reluctant help of an old friend from among the Chimer priests, the old dwarf summoned Azura and requested she prove to him that she truly is all-knowing. With his students looking on, the Dwemer placed a featureless box before Azura and asked simply that she tell him what was within. Annoyed at such a trivial display of her vast powers, Azura immediately declared that the box held a red-petaled flower. The old dwarf was silent as he gravely opened the box to reveal that it was completely empty. When all had turned their attention from the box back to the Daedric Prince Azura, she had vanished. Only the Chimer priest had seen Azura before she departed, and her expression had turned his knees to water. The old Dwemer sage had very nearly collapsed as well, weakened not by superstitious terror, but from the giddy excitement of confirming a long-held belief that could never have been proven. The gods held unimaginable strength, but they were not all-powerful. They could be fooled. While his students carried the laughing dwarf back to his chambers, a single red flower petal fell from the folds of his robe. The wise old Dwemer died peacefully in his sleep that very night. This legend makes a subtle hint that the sudden departure of the Dwemer may have had less to do with their vile abuse of ancient relics, and more to do with the frightening indignation of an omnipotent goddess who had been fooled by one lonely, dying old dwarf. But it is a myth, nothing more. It was following the disappearance of the Dwemer that Azura would truly demonstrate the horrific depths of her vindictive fury. With the birth of the man-gods of the tribunal, Amalexia, Vivek, and Sothasil, a sacred vow to mighty Azura was shattered, and her wrath was boundless. Yet the new immortals chose to taunt a furious Azura, so she pronounced her judgment not only upon the trio of renegade gods, but upon the entire Chimer race, the very race she had helped to establish the land of Morrowind so long ago. "This is not my act, but your act. You think yourselves gods, but you are blind, and all is darkness." In that very instant, the horrified Chimer found their flesh turned the color of ash, and that their eyes burnt a hellish red, as it remains to this very day, while they knew immediately that their precious deity Azura had turned her favor from them. They knew not why. Along with the Dunmer, Azura is also worshipped by the Khajiit, who revere the Daedric prince as the mother of their species. According to Khajiit myth, Azura is one of the many children born of the primordial gods who created the universe and its planes, of which Nirn is one and Oblivion another. For her loyalty, Azura was rewarded by one of these most ancient of deities with 3 gifts, and instructed to choose a species amongst the children of Nirn to bestow them upon. According to the Khajiit, these gifts were then given to the fastest, most beautiful and clever creatures in all the world. Taken from amongst the Aldmer, those who were described as forest people torn between man and beast, Azura's chosen ones transformed into the various forms of the Khajiit, and the cycles of their lives were bound by Azura to the 2 moons, Maser and Secunda. Azura's realm of oblivion is called Moonshadow, and it is here that the Daedric Prince of Dusk and Dawn sits upon a throne of roses. Her domain is an extraordinary place of perfumed air, sparkling waterfalls, and cities of silver. It has been said that all the colors in Moonshadow run like water, and accounts describe it as a place of such overwhelming beauty that those who see it are literally half-blinded by their mortal inability to process such overpowering splendor. Azura has presented the world with a Daedric artifact known as the Star of Azura. It is a soul gem designed to hold the life force of defeated enemies for later use in the art of enchanting. Unlike other soul gems, Azura's star is the only reusable gem in existence. While other lesser gems are destroyed when drawn upon, Azura's star is everlasting and can trap any soul, no matter its size. In the hands of one who has properly learned the craft of enchantment, Azura's star is an asset of truly monumental power. As such, it has been sought after by an endless array of wizards, assassins, and warriors. The other artifact attributed to Azura is the Moon and Star Ring. Forged by Dwemer mastersmiths, this ring was blessed by Azura herself and intended to be worn by one person, and one person only, Enduril Nerevar, chieftain of the Chimer. It was the ring's constant and powerful persuasion enchantment that aided the charismatic Nerevar in bringing together the various battling clans of the Chimer to form the historic First Council, whose members included even the Dwemer. It also provided absolute proof of Nerevar's identity, since any other mortal who dared attempt to use the ring would be killed immediately. It was the Moon and Star Ring that would later play a pivotal part in the Nerevarine prophecies, since it confirmed for all to see that the reincarnation of Lord Enduril Nerevar had risen to unite the 5 great houses of the Dunmer with the barbaric clans of the Ashlanders. Azura's influence continues to resonate throughout the world of mortals. Despite her reputation as one of the 3 good Daedra by the Dark Elves of Morrowind, she has shown time and time again that she will always get exactly what she wants, even if it puts the welfare of her followers and other mortals into the greatest of peril. Perhaps she truly does feel concern for the lives of those who cross her path or find themselves chosen by her, but it is essential to always remember that Azura is a Daedric prince, and that her motivations will never truly be comprehensible to the limited perceptions of man and mer. While Azura has in the past been referred to as devious, even her furtive ways are transparent in comparison to those of Mephala, she who is called the web spinner. Like the spider she is often likened to, Mephala plucks the threads of mortal lives for her amusement, and is the patron deity of the dreaded Morag Tong Guild of Assassins. It was Dark Mephala who would teach the Chimer the ways of stealthy evasion and the art of swift and silent murder. Chapter the 9th, Mephala. In the days immediately following the Chimer's exodus from the Somerset Isles, the elves were under constant threat from the elements, bandits, and rogue marauders. Azura had taught them to be shadowy and mysterious, while Boethiah had shown them the finer points of architecture, philosophy, and politics. But there was one who would teach the Chimer to evade their enemies, to conspire against them, and to kill them silently. It was unknowable, enigmatic Mephala, she who is called Web Spinner, the Spider God. True to her namesake, the spheres of Mephala's influence are hidden from the perceptions of mortals, but she has been called the Daedric Prince of Murder, Sex, and Secrets. Considered to be among the 3 good Daedra, along with Boethiah and Azura, Mephala was seen as an aspect of tribunal god Vivek, the beautiful blood-stained warrior poet, who is considered to be at once male and female. Much like Vivek, Mephala's nature is often contradictory, simultaneously subtle and excessive, a scream engulfed by a whisper. The only constant characteristic of Mephala's persona is an inclination to interfere in the affairs of mortals for her own amusement. Mephala sees these human dramas as threads in a gigantic weave. Tug at the proper series of threads, and the entire web unravels. This entertains the Daedric lore to no end. Such is the tale of the two unfortunate families of the settlement of Bleak's Way, who literally tore each other to pieces as a result of Mephala's manipulations. It is believed that the assassins known as the Morag Tong came to be as a result of Mephala's teaching the Chimer the art of secret murder. After Mephala helped Boethiah to establish the clan system that would ultimately become the great houses of the Dunmer, the Morag Tong became a natural extension of the principles the political system was based upon. Over the years, the Morag Tong would develop into a legally recognized organization of killers for hire. When no other course of action was suitable to resolve a conflict, the Chimer would use the Morag Tong, offering money for an honorable execution. With strict laws of governing, the Morag Tong's intent is to prevent bloodshed with calculated killings, and is considered a guild, much like the societies devoted to fighters and mages. There are many who see no difference between the dutiful Morag Tong and the murderous and bloodthirsty Dark Brotherhood. In fact, there are those who believe that the Dark Brotherhood's Night Mother is really Mephala in disguise. A splinter group that broke away from the Morag Tong in its early years, the Scythes worshipping death cult, has no qualms over committing simple detached contract murder for hire, and worse. For years, the Dark Brotherhood has long been rumored to have abducted many innocents for obscene sacrifices to Scythes and profane acts of necromancy. Many scholars cite inferences to the 27 threads of the web spinner, which were enchanted items created by the Daedric lord Sanguine for Mephala to bestow upon her Morag Tong followers. These accounts say that these tokens were stolen by the Dark Brotherhood on the orders of the Night Mother. Mephala responded by arranging to have the items retrieved and the entire Dark Brotherhood killed, including the mysterious Night Mother. If true, this legend would confirm that the two groups of assassins are not only vastly removed from one another, but also disproves the theory that Lord Mephala and the Night Mother are one and the same. Mephala's servants are known as Spider Daedra, and are fearsome, even by Daedric standards. These monstrous human-spider hybrids are notoriously erratic and difficult to control, making them unsuitable for any magic user, even the very strongest of conjurers. Even great Mephala herself has had difficulties commanding these vicious nightmare creatures that are not only strong and fast, but extremely violent as well. There are unconfirmed rumors that the Spider Daedra were more easily bound and conjured before the Oblivion Crisis. Bound Spider Daedra are particularly lethal due to their ability to create spiderlings, or small versions of themselves that are capable of causing paralysis in their targets. Easily as terrible as the dread Spider Daedra is the artifact Mephala has unleashed upon the world. The Ebony Blade has been called both the Vampire and the Leech, and the names are most appropriate. This evil weapon literally drains the life force of its target, transferring that life energy to the wielder of the sword. The Ebony Blade has had several incarnations over the years, appearing as a one- or two-handed katana with a variety of enchantments in addition to its horrific, life-draining properties. It has been known to enhance the wielder's skill with the weapon, or to silence any spellcasters struck with it. As with all artifacts of true evil, the Ebony Blade ultimately devours the soul of its user and consigns it to oblivion. One of the most recent undocumented theories to surface suggests the Ebony Blade deposits these souls directly into Mephala's realm, but this is purest conjecture, and because of the impenetrable nature of the web-spinner's sphere, it is impossible to confirm. So seductive is the pull of this weapon that it can corrupt and pervert the motivations of even the most decent of people. The grim blade is never more powerful than when used to murder those closest to the one who wields it before damning their betrayed souls to oblivion. It is said a powerful wizard once cast a spell upon the Ebony Blade that caused it to change owners, sometimes of its own accord. If the legend is true, this is a blessing, as the Ebony Blade will eventually drive the one who wields it utterly insane. Mephala, of course, revels in the downfall of anyone foolish enough to raise the vile weapon, as well as in the destruction it brings to the lives of those closest to the wielder of the Ebony Blade. The other artifact associated with Mephala is the Ring of Khajiit. The ring was stolen from Mephala's person by Rajin, a master thief of such skill the Khajiit would later name him the Thief God. Using the Ring of Khajiit, Rajin was invisible, silent, and could literally move like the wind. With the ring's assistance, Rajin was so stealthy, he is rumored to have stolen a tattoo from the neck of the Empress Kintyre Septim as she slept. With his natural skills and the enchantments of the Ring of Khajiit, Rajin became the greatest thief elsewhere had ever known. While his eventual fate is unknown, some believe that after grossly overusing the ring, it abandoned Rajin when he most needed it and left him helpless before his enemies. There is another Khajiit legend that implies the ring was simply returned to Mephala by Rajin. In either case, the ring ultimately found its way back to Mephala, as she has been known to reward those who do her bidding with it. Mephala rejoices in the seduction of mortals, their schemes, their lusts, and their inevitable downfall and ruin. Secreted away like a spider within its web, she plucks at threads from the myriad strands of mortal weakness and folly, and laughs as the connections that bind lives together fall away until the entire web collapses and comes apart. She lurks wherever conspiracy rears its head and whispers into the minds of those who scheme in secret and kill when no one is looking. If Mephala is the Daedric prince of sex, secrets, and murder, who orchestrates contention amongst mortals, weaving her influence like vine tendrils, her sibling is he who records these events, both great and small, writing them upon the scrolls of eternity, having known their outcome before the very first steps were conceived. He is the Daedric prince of fate and knowledge, and scribes the forbidden secrets of all existence in the pages of his black books. Chapter the 10th, Hermes Mora. The world of Nirn boasts many gods and demons, fearsome beings capable of leveling mountains, commanding nightmare creatures, and harnessing the elemental forces of this world and the next. But if knowledge is power, there is one greater than all the gods in existence, known as the Golden Eye and the Wretched Abyss. He is Hermes Mora, and his spheres of dominion encompass the furthest reaches of knowledge and the deepest depths of fate. Sibling to the Daedric prince of sex and murder, Mephala, Hermes Mora presides over the secret knowledge of all the realms as he looks out on Apocrypha, his own Plane of Oblivion. It is there that his monstrous Daedric servants, known as Seekers, protected the arcane information held within from the coveting eyes of mortals. Apocrypha has been described as an infinite library of black-covered, featureless books, stacked in rows as high as the tentacle-filled green sky, and bordered with corrosive, acidic waters, while random pages and floating tomes move of their own accord through the air of the realm. There are areas of Apocrypha that have been taken by the foulest of darkness and will kill any who enter on contact. In addition to Seekers, other servants of Hermes Mora include the Lurkers, who wait beneath the roiling waves to trap the unwary with their monstrous tentacles. Such are the dangers to the eager mortals who wander Apocrypha, seeking the powerful revelations contained within the sprawling ruins and immense carvings scattered amongst the endless stacks of books. Black books are the most efficient way to enter Apocrypha, but the risk of being driven mad by the unknowable truths contained within the domain of Hermes Mora is dangerously high. Such was the fate of Morian Zenas, a powerful magic user who dared explore the various realms of Oblivion. After visiting wanderers in frightening realms such as Azura's Moonshadow and Malakath's Ashpit, the mage found himself on the plane of Apocrypha and was seduced by the lure of knowledge that could be had there. Zena's mind was quickly consumed by the revelations he found, his entire consciousness devoured by the cosmic truths of all existence, arcane secrets that mortals were never meant to know. It is assumed that Morian Zenas wanders there still, obsessively searching for ever more obscure knowledge to the exclusion of all other things. It is said that should one manage to navigate Apocrypha and return to Nirn with their sanity intact, they will have gained powerful insights, and if so desired, can return to Hermes Mora's deadly gauntlet again, searching for the answers to even deeper mysteries. The most powerful book of knowledge associated with Hermes Mora is the artifact known as the Ogma Infinium. It is a twisted book bound in flesh. Rumor says each scrap of skin was taken from the various elven races, green for Orsimer, tan for Bosmer, grey for Falmer, yellow for Altmer, and darkest grey for Dunmer. The smallest and darkest scrap of skin in the upper left corner is speculated to be the skin of a Dwemer. Only rumor, though, unverified, of course. Written by the scribe Xarxes, Hermes Mora has used the Ogma Infinium as a reward for those who do his bidding, such as during the events of the Warp in the West, where an unidentified agent of the Blades killed a noble who had run afoul of the Daedric prince. By plumbing the depths of the three primary sections of the book, the Path of Steel, the Path of Shadow, and the Path of Spirit, the reader is granted access to the energy of the artifact, and can use that energy to achieve near godlike abilities. Once the Ogma Infinium has been used, it will disappear from the possession of the reader until it is utilized again by the Daedric prince as a compensation for acting on his behalf. It is believed that by reading black books in conjunction with the Ogma Infinium, much more power can be acquired than by simply using either of the powerful tomes on their own. Hermes Mora was once known as Hermes Mora, or in some legends as the Woodland Man, who takes ill-fated villagers who have lost their way in the woods. Hermes Mora is said to have almost fooled the ferocious Nords into becoming part of the elven race. The hunter's name was Isgramor, and he was the king of Atmora, the land from whence the Nordic race came to Tamriel. Isgramor had been entrusted with an enchanted bowstring that made his powerful bow, Long Launcher, that much more impressive. But along with the increased capacity of the weapon the bow would gently sigh when held at the ready, and moan audibly when fired. Still, Esgrimor hunted and killed much game with long launcher and the woeful bowstring in the woods of Atmora. As he rested, taking a drink from a nearby fjord, along came a magnificent beast, the white stag of Forelgrim, who eluded the Atmoran king's best efforts to bring it down with his mighty bow. After repeatedly tracking and losing the animal, Esgrimor's frustration was great, for he had sworn to fell the stag no matter where it ran. The huge beast was smart, crafty, and very quiet for so massive a creature. It was said to pass as silently over the snow as a mist. Indeed, the moaning of the woeful bowstring made far more noise than the wily stag, giving away Esgrimor's position time after time. Finally, Esgrimor's irritation got the better of him, and he broke off the chase after losing the trail yet again. Along came the hare, who informed the aggravated king of the location of his prey. Esgrimor demanded to know how it was that the hare could know such a thing. The hare responded by saying it was by virtue of its long ears that it should be allowed to hear the great stag wherever it did go. Impulsively, Esgrimor wished to have ears as long and responsive as that of the hare at once. The hare's pink nose twitched, and Esgrimor's ears began to grow long and tapered. But before the transformation could be completed, a fox leapt from a nearby thicket and mercilessly slew the hare. As breath left the hare, Esgrimor could feel his ears returning to their original size and shape. The fox spoke to Esgrimor, informing him that the hare had in fact been old Hermes Mora in disguise and had nearly tricked Esgrimor into becoming part of Elvenkind. The fox, who was in fact Shor, the trickster god, warned the king to rely on the methods of man and to reject the wiles of the elves, lest he and his subjects join their ranks. And Esgrimor, suitably chastised, continued on to pursue the great white stag of Forelgrim with nothing but his wits, his skill, and mighty long launcher to serve him. Like the other Daedric princes, this fable and many others suggest he is able to change his appearance at will. Unlike the majority of Daedric princes, however, Hermes Mora has foregone a conventional appearance, preferring instead to be seen as a monstrous void, a nightmare emptiness writhing with eyes and tentacles, or a creature vaguely resembling a gigantic crab. From his shrine in Cyrodiil, Hermes Mora speaks only to those deemed to be the most deserving, straining their sanity with convoluted, horrific impressions of secret knowledge and hidden meaning. Meanwhile, his mortal followers toil endlessly to accrue more information, even at the cost of their minds, their lives, or the lives of others. Hermes Mora makes allowance for the truly worthy, allowing these chosen few to explore the boundaries of reality and the pathways of space and time. Whereas Hermes Mora and his followers seek to bring to light the mysteries of the universe with ever-increasing knowledge, another Daedric prince thrives in the emptiness and mystery of the void. She is the unknowable, the mistress of shadows, and her sphere is darkness itself. Revered by the Thieves' Guild, yet indifferent to their adoration, she has turned the tide of Tamriel from the shadows, cloaked in the warm embrace of night. Chapter the 11th, Nocturnal. She exists as an incarnation of the void that is oblivion, shrouded in enigma and secrecy. She is the daughter of twilight and the empress of murk. She is Nocturnal, the one whose sphere of influence is darkness and night. Nocturnal is the Daedric prince of mystery and the unfathomable. From her realm to her artifacts, she remains forever inscrutable, forever the unknowable. Reluctant patron to the Thieves' Guild, Nocturnal is not only their inspiration, but their strength. She is Lady Luck, and commands the unseen force we call chance. Those who make their living from the shadows will tell you it would be wise to pay tribute to the Night Mistress. The criminal element on Tamriel hold her in high esteem, and Nocturnal has arguably one of the largest followings of all the Daedric princes. Most of her followers do not worship her, however. Nocturnal is seen more as a motherly figure by her cultists, and she would just as soon punish her children than reward them. Nocturnal resides in Evergloam, a place of perpetual half-light, also known as the Cradle of Shadow. Here, Nocturnal looks out over her Plane of Oblivion and the many pocket realms that reside within it, such as the dreadful Crow's Wood. Crow's Wood is an eerie forest locale inhabited by all manner of bestial nightmare creatures and dominated by the Black Feather Court, a great host of sentient crows who make continual war with the wolves and giant bats that also populate Crow's Wood. It is unknown at this time what connection, if any, the Black Feather Court has to the speaking ravens that are frequently seen perched on Nocturnal's shoulders in the various depictions of the Daedric Lord. Another noteworthy realm of the Evergloam is the Shade Perilous, a place treasured by many Daedric clans for the easily harvested darkling mana found there. It is a place that has been fought over many times over the millennia, and its bloody landscape has served as the setting for pivotal points in the history of Nirn, including the invasion of the Battle Spire during the Imperial Simulacrum. It is believed that the Shade Perilous is no longer accessible by any means to those who would seek it. Access to the Evergloam is gained by accessing the Ebony Male, a portal that connects Nocturnal's land to Tamriel. Found deep within the ancient temple of Skyrim, known as the Twilight Sepulchre, the Ebony Male is guarded by the lethal, shadowy nightingales, a trio of deadly operatives who protect the Twilight Sepulchre from the ambitious thieves who attempt to infiltrate the place where Tamriel meets the domain of the revered Mistress of Shadows. The nightingales exist to protect not only the Twilight Sepulchre, but the Skeleton Key as well. The Skeleton Key is one of the most notable artifacts Nocturnal has bestowed upon the world of man and mer. The artifact has been seen as an actual key, though sometimes it appears to be a lockpick, albeit an unbreakable one. Regardless of its appearance, its actual purpose is a definite and specific one. The Skeleton Key is the only way to unlock the Ebony Male and cross the threshold into Nocturnal's place of oblivion. Without it, even if one could get into the Twilight Sepulchre and past the fearsome Nightingale Trinity, all effort would be for naught. The Skeleton Key itself has the ability to unlock practically anything, from conventional door locks and obscure gateways to magical portals and more. It is so prized a possession among Tamriel's criminals that many would gladly face the Nightingales for the chance to possess it. The Skeleton Key is so powerful a Daedric artifact that great wizards of the past have seen fit to place limitations on the various aspects of the key to avoid its eventual misuse. Its properties have appeared to change with each person who holds it, and will never be held by one person for any length of time. Eventually, it will move on of its own accord. Perhaps this is why Nocturnal is believed to allow the Skeleton Key to be regularly lost or even stolen, even though she has tasked her nightingales with protecting the fabled artifact. The nightingales, who have themselves bartered their very souls in exchange for the privilege of serving the Night Mistress. Due to this Daedric prince's status among thieves, it comes as no surprise that the greatest accomplishment a thief can aspire to is to steal the personal items of Nocturnal herself. The grey cowl once belonged to the Daedric prince and has been repeatedly stolen as a trophy, despite the fact that the Lady of Shadows laid a curse upon it. Anyone who wears the cowl of Nocturnal is immediately forgotten by history. Inside the hood of the cowl is inscribed the words, "Shadow hide you," which has become a mantra for the Thieves' Guild, who continue to worship Nocturnal despite her relative indifference. Needless to say, the cowl has become the stuff of legend. One such legend, although most likely fabricated, illustrates the lengths thieves will go to in order to possess Nocturnal's artifacts. It is the story of a young girl, a thief, and a capable one at that, who had been discovered in the home of a master thief. She had come not to steal, she claimed, but to learn from him. The young burglar stole not for need, or even want, but solely for the love of stealing, for the thrill and exhilaration of the theft itself. It was a trait that would lead her to her demise. She scoffed at the master thief, and mocked him for not living up to his reputation, before disappearing from sight. Moving swiftly and silently, she made her way back to the room she had bought in a run-down old tavern. When she entered, she was shocked to find the master waiting for her in the darkness of the empty room. He showed her the method he had used to overtake her without her knowing. He emphasized the fact that distraction would always be the most powerful tool in any thief's array of talents, no matter how skilled. But the young cat burglar challenged him, still dubious of the man and his reputation. When he told her what he had planned for them, all her doubt evaporated. It seemed his reputation for daring had not been exaggerated after all. The two thieves, master and apprentice, were going to attempt to steal that which cannot be stolen. They were going to steal from Nocturnal herself. On a dark and ominous night, 17 white-robed witches gathered around a tree to perform a ritual of summoning. As they sang, the light illuminating them changed, and the color went out of all things that could be seen. As light left the world, Nocturnal stepped out of the all-encompassing darkness. The witches wailed loudly and knelt before the Daedric Lord, who smiled, pleased with their song. Nocturnal shed her cloak of night and stood naked before her witches, who still moaned their devotion to her with all their might. From the tree, the young burglar reached for the cast-off cloak of shadow, still in awe of what it was she was attempting, even as her fingertips were close enough to touch the Daedric prince herself. But something was wrong. Where was her master? Had he meant for her to make the theft all on her own? Thoughts raced through her head. Sidetracked, her focus slipped for just a fraction of a moment, and she was found out. Hissing with rage, the Daedric Lord demanded to know who this girl was. The breath left the girl's lungs in a shudder as the everlasting coldness engulfed her. In the scant seconds she had left before her demise, the young burglar noticed that the cowl of Nocturnal was gone. With an amused smirk, she finally understood what her master had done. The only thing better than talent and skill was a distraction, and she was the distraction. Nocturnal continues to be the darkness that hides the secret things and deeds that lie at the shadowed hearts of mortals. She is the eternal cold of nothingness, and the incarnation of the absence of light, the place where unseen things scuttle and flit about. She will always have the devotion of any who operate in shadow, and her nightingales wait eternally in the dark recesses of the twilight sepulchre to challenge any who would dare journey to her dark world. If Nocturnal is the embodiment of darkness, then this next Daedric prince is the embodiment of light, for she walks in the full and unfettered brightness of the day and the glorious radiance of life. A bitter enemy to all things undead, she has been said to bend and shape the very rays of the sun to her will and to her purpose. Chapter the 12th, Meridia. She is the embodiment of life and of light, the lady of infinite energies, an enemy of all things undead, and the bane of any who would dabble in the craft of necromancy. She is the Daedric prince Meridia, and while her sphere of influence is hidden away from the eyes of mortals, Meridia is associated with the energies of all things living. In the time before time, there was Magnus, the god of magic, and one of the original spirits called the Et'Ada. It was the Et'Ada who were convinced by the primal god Lorcan to create Mundus, the mortal plane. This new plane was one of powerful magic and dangerously unstable. The divine Et'Ada were burdened by their new mortality and chose to leave Mundus rather than be bound to it. Magnus had been the architect of this realm and wished to end this project rather than see it collapse under its own weight. Still, some of these heavenly creatures could not bear to part from this wondrous and majestic plane of existence, and chose instead to sacrifice their divine powers in the interest of securing a place among the realms of Mundus for all time. Magnus himself chose to withdraw, and in doing so, tore a hole in the space between the mortal plane of Mundus and the immortal plane of Aetherius. This light from this rift became the blazing sun, appropriately taking on the name Magnus, and it is this light that shines to this day upon the world of Nirn. Other divine beings fled Mundus as well to follow the architect Magnus to the heart of all magic, Aetherius. As they left, they tore holes in the rift as well and created the twinkling stars of the cosmos. These beings were called the Magnugi, literally translated to children of Magnus. Among these so-called star orphans was one who would come to be called Meridia. There is debate as to the particulars of the scandal, but it is said that Meridia was cast out of Aetherius and later chose to assume the role of Daedric prince. Meridia went on to create her realm of oblivion, the colored rooms, by bending the light of the sun, using its rays to carve out her sphere from the pandemonium of the void itself. The golden-armored Daedra called Aurorans are believed to inhabit the colored rooms and have been referred to as the spawn of Meridia herself. Dawnbreaker is Meridia's foremost artifact, and a testament to the extreme hatred the Daedric prince feels for those who traffic in death and on life. Incarnated as an ebony longsword, Dawnbreaker features a crossguard that shines with light from within, leading to its distinctive nature and name, and the imperative from Meridia to burn away corruption and false life. While extremely potent against both Daedra and werewolves, the weapon's primary focus is the destruction of Meridia's foes, namely undead creatures. With gouts of magical flame that can drive the undead back to their graves, Dawnbreaker is the bane of all things unliving. There have been rumors of a connection between Meridia and the artifact known as the Ring of Khajiit, which has also been attributed to the Daedric prince of sex and murder, Mephala. It is unclear exactly how the ring connects these two radically different Daedric lords, but Meridia has offered the ring in reward for those who do her bidding on more than one occasion. The most recent record was in the middle of the Third Era, when Meridia sent her chosen one to clear a cave of necromancers who had offended the Daedric prince with their very presence and the obscene rites they did perform. Most likely due to her disdain for the undead, Meridia is considered one of the few Daedric lords that is not wholly evil. But this is contrasted by the vindictive rage she visited on the Ayleid city of Abagarlas. The Ayleid Elves were among the first of the mortal races to establish an empire in Tamriel, and had ruled Cyrodiil for years without number. These elves were masters of architecture, and built astonishing cities that were unparalleled marvels of craftsmanship, including the imperial city which still stands today. Some scholars fancy the Ayleids as star worshippers. Many are led to believe they revered magic and the primeval element of light. Evidence suggests Magnus and Meridia were held in high esteem among their kind. Uncovered Ayleid tablets suggest a story of unlucky souls who dared to disturb Meridia's shrine while attempting to make the city of Abagarlas their own, and were mercilessly crushed by the angered god. According to the tablets, these people may have been Ayleid settlers, or perhaps worshippers of Meridia herself. But regardless of their intent, Meridia's profoundest pleasure is clear for anyone brave enough to plumb the silent depths of the sideways cave just outside the Imperial City. There is the tale of the one Meridia selected as her champion to stop the heroic and murderous Pellinal White Strake, who stood with Saint Alessia as she led the slave rebellion of the First Era. Known as the enemy of all elf-kind, White Strake had garnered fame for the wholesale massacre of Ayleid settlements during the uprising of the early Cyrodiil slaves against their sadistic Heartland High Elf masters. White Strake slew with great relish and ferocity, and many elves fell at his hands. So it was that the remaining Ayleid sorcerer kings allied themselves with Meridia and her Aurorans to find a champion who could stand against White Strake, even as he used otherworldly armor and weapons that were considered nearly unstoppable. It was the golden-skinned half-elf Umoril the Unfeathered who rose to challenge Pellinal White Strake for the salvation of the Ayleid race. The son of an Ayleid mother and a divine father, Umoril was granted immortality by the Daedric Lord Meridia as a pact between the Ayleid sorcerer kings and the Aurorans who served her. Umoril wore White Strake down by sending in wave after wave of soldiers that Umoril had hoarded specifically for the purpose of giving their lives to weaken the champion of the Alessian slave rebellion. Once he saw that his forces had left White Strake bleeding and grievously wounded, Umoril himself engaged Pellinal White Strake over the bodies of the elves that had died at White Strake's hand. Even though he was fatigued and weak from loss of blood, a maddened Pellinal White Strake still managed to defeat Umoril the Unfeathered, laying low the half-elven warrior and insulting the blood of the Ayleids themselves as Umoril died. But it was a fleeting victory, as Pellinal White Strake was torn to pieces thereafter by the other elven sorcerer kings who had been maddened themselves at the disrespect shown by White Strake. Yet, even though Umoril had been struck down, Meridia was true to her word, and he did not die. Cast adrift on the waters of oblivion, Umoril waited thousands of years to return to the realm of mortals to take vengeance on the divines with the Aurorans who still obeyed his commands, desecrating chapel after chapel upon his return at the end of the Third Era. Umoril was stopped by none other than the divine Crusader. With the Crusader relics that White Strake himself had wielded so long ago, Umoril the Unfeathered was beaten on both the physical and spiritual planes, and the golden-hued champion of Meridia finally met his end. Meridia remains the embodiment of light, and a beacon for any who seek her radiance, just as she was when her Ayleid followers knelt to her in times long past. As a so-called star orphan and child of Magnus, there are many who seek the illumination this Daedric prince offers. But where there is light, there must also be darkness, and there is a Daedric prince whose very sphere is eternal darkness. She is the god who is associated with the cold, wet, slithering things that skitter about in the places where light does not go. Where Meridia scorns and reviles all things unliving, this prince devours them. She is the patron of the cast-off, the rejected, and the worthless. Her followers live among the refuse of society and give their worship to her in the most vile and despicable of ways. Chapter the 13th. Namira and Periite. Wheedle was the 13th child of the king of Valenwood. Being so far down the progression of heirs, Wheedle's chances of inheriting land, wealth, or a crown was painfully small. Wheedle knew that the fortune and power he sought would never be found unless he did something to hasten his fortune. Wheedle left the lands of the king and travelled through many villages and forest roads seeking prosperity. One day, he came across a beggar wrapped in filthy rags, who was on the verge of being slain by 3 townsmen. With an angry battle cry, Wheedle charged the townsmen, who were armed with only simple farming tools. Wheedle wore armor and wielded a fine sword, and the townsmen fled, knowing they were no match for the intimidating figure. The ragged beggar offered her thanks, which Wheedle accepted, even though the rotten smell wafting from the figure was almost too much to bear. When he asked her name, the beggar responded simply, "I am Namira." Raised as the child of a king, Weedle knew the name and understood the situation immediately. The wretch who stood there was the Daedric prince of decay and revulsion. To the simple townsfolk, the stinking, rag-wrapped figure was but a common beggar, but to Weedle, Namira represented only one thing: opportunity. He couldn't understand why a being so powerful had allowed mere mortals to threaten her existence. Surely, if Namira wanted, she could have turned her bullies to dust. Still, Weedle begged Namira to take him on as her apprentice. Namira was impassive and shambled away, for she needed no such apprentice. Weedle was undeterred and followed Namira for 33 days and nights, pleading the entire time to the stoic Daedric lord to be taken on as her apprentice. After a month of incessant begging, Weedle's voice was gone, and all he could do was kneel before Namira, hands raised in painful, silent appeal. Weedle's suffering moved the wretched god, and Namira finally relented. "It would seem you have completed your apprenticeship to me, after all," Namira declared. "I shall grant your request. I grant you the power of disease. You may choose to be afflicted with any disease you choose, changing them at will, so long as it has visible symptoms. However, you must always bear at least one. I grant you the power of pity. You may evoke pity in anyone that sees you. Finally, I grant you the power of disregard. You may cause others to disregard your presence." Weedle was crushed, for these were far from the blessings envisioned when he had begged and pleaded to be taken under the wing of the Daedric prince. They were curses, each one more repulsive than the last, and to be burdened with all three was a fate too horrible to conceive. "How am I to make my fortune and forge a name for myself with these terrible gifts?" asked Weedle in despair. "As you begged at my feet for 33 days and 33 nights, so shall you now beg for your fortune in the cities of men. Your name will become legendary among the beggars of Tamriel. The story of Weedle, the prince of beggars, shall be handed down throughout the generations." And so it was that Weedle became a beggar so piteous and so wretched that none could look upon the lowly figure without being compelled to toss a coin at Weedle's feet. Weedle soon found great power in being ignored, for people would speak of things in front of a filthy, huddled beggar that they would never speak of in front of anyone else. Soon Weedle knew not only the secrets of those nearby, but their comings and goings as well. Thus it is said that if one wishes to know that which is not so easily known, they should ask the beggars, for they are the ones who know even the smallest secrets of those around them. It is a power granted them by she who is called the Great Darkness and the Spirit Daedra. She is foul Namira, the Lady of Decay, and her sphere of influence is the ancient and eternal darkness. Namira is associated with spiders, maggots, and other things that mortals tend to find repulsive and disgusting. The followers of Namira show their devotion by choosing to live in the most squalid of conditions, wallowing in filth and refuse, separated from the cultural norms of society. The cult of Namira takes their worship one ghastly step further by literally devouring the flesh of other mortals. By indulging in this most universal of taboos, Namira's cultists further remove themselves from the customs and institutions accepted by the general populace. Appropriately, Namira's realm of oblivion, the scuttling void, is a place shrouded in darkness, and like many pockets of oblivion, it is hidden from the eyes of all mortals. Namira has bestowed upon the world of Nirn one artifact, the Ring of Namira, usually granted to mortals who are suitably repugnant, and who carry out her dark and foreboding orders. The ring has exhibited different properties over the millennia. It has sometimes been said to reflect ill intent back onto an attacker, while at other times it has granted the wearer increased vigor and vitality in return for the consumption of mortal flesh. Namira presides over the unseen things that lurk and skitter in foul, wet darkness as her followers encompass the depths of revulsion and despair. She remains the patron of beggars and the discarded remnants of society. She is the beacon for those whom disease and festering sickness have forced out of the realm of cultural acceptance. But even as sickening as she is, she cannot be considered the most repellent of the Daedric lords. There is another who parallels many of Namira's distasteful qualities. Periite is the Daedric prince of pestilence and order. Like Namira, Periite's followers are often afflicted with diseases, and it is said Periite himself takes pleasure in bestowing sickness upon them. From his fiery realm, known as the Pits, Periite maintains the natural order among lesser Daedra inhabiting the lowest planes of oblivion. His maintenance of the lower forms of Daedra has earned him the name of Taskmaster. The Pits is believed to be a hellish place, comprised of seas of molten rock, volcanic islands inhabited by various Daedra, and crumbling, ruined structures. While the many plagues and epidemics visited among the mortals of Tamriel have been attributed to Periite, he is considered one of the weakest of all the Daedric lords. Despite this, Periite is often incarnated as a four-legged dragon, though he has also been depicted as a gathering of fetid, squirming skeevers. He may be considered one of the lowest among Daedric princes, but he is still a Daedric prince, and whenever a plague threatens to smother life on Nirn, its citizens are reminded what a Daedric lord is capable of. The only artifact attributed to Periite is Spellbreaker, one of the oldest relics to be found in Tamriel. Seemingly a dwarven tower shield, the artifact protects the wielder not only from physical harm, but magical impairment as well. It has been known to reflect magic, dispel curses, and to silence any magic users preparing to cast spells. Believed to still search for its original owner, Spellbreaker does not remain the property of any given person for long before moving on of its own accord. A common theme among so-called gifts the Daedra are willing to part with. While many Daedric princes boast power over great spheres of death and domination, Namira and Periite hold sway over the broken, the afflicted, and the rejected. Their influence and power may not possess the grandeur you'd expect, but power is power, and they use their authority to toy with the insects on Tamriel all the same. Even as these two Daedric princes deal in physical illness and disease, there is another prince who brings these illnesses to the mind in horrific nightmares, the kind of which linger on even in your waking hours. For in the stillness of night, when men are asleep and at their most vulnerable, this Daedric prince feasts on those who dare to dream. Chapter the 14th, Vermina. There once lived an artist by the name of Darius Shano, who had used his vivid dreams to inspire others for years through song and spoken word. This Breton had garnered much fame due to his use of beautiful imagery and elegant language. The Daedric prince Vermina was very proud of her artist, seeing as she commanded the Breton's dreams and thus served as his inspiration. While Vermina held great affection for him, the attentions of a Daedric prince often leads to mischief, and this tale is no different. Vermina and the Daedric prince Sheogorath looked down upon the Breton as he slept. The mad god said that it was not people's love that made Vermina's artist great, but their hatred. If great men are usually hated as much as they are loved, then could Vermina conjure hatred in the artist as well? Vermina conceded that mortals were indeed foolish and petty insects, given to despising those among them who have great vision. She also believed that she could sow such seeds of hatred in the heart of the artist and those around him. To prove her point, Vermina accepted a wager offered by Lord Sheogorath. She would enter the mind of Darius Shano and poison his thoughts with horrific nightmares. Then, in 10 years' time, she would allow Sheogorath to do the same, and they would see whose talents were the greater. Vermina was supremely confident, for she knew the mad god could never be as suited to the task of crafting nightmare visions as the dream weaver herself. Darius had always been afraid of the night, but now the terror of darkness was overpowering, absolute. No peace was to be had in his slumber, only horror and an empty, unnameable dread. He would scream at the top of his lungs, only to find his shrieks had been smothered by the cold and eternal dark. When Darius clawed his way to wakefulness, the fear would be gone, for his faith in Vermina was steadfast and resolute. In time, Vermina visited him directly and whispered softly in his ear, "Watch carefully, my beloved." Vermina tore away the veil she had mercifully put up, and revealed to her disciple visions of death and anguish so profound it made Darius's former night terrors seem pale and small by comparison. The Daedric prince showed him visions of murder, torture, and creatures so intensely horrific that anguished screams would fill his mind each time he closed his eyes. These agonizing nightmare images tore at his soul, and soon revealed themselves in his compositions. The grotesque images filled his work, and the horrors they held transfixed his audience with the ghastliness of their impressions. The public was disgusted by his words, even as they were undeniably compelled and fascinated by them. They trembled in delicious indignation, fretting over every detail, even as they condemned the imagery itself. Some gloried in the lurid spectacle, and Darius Shano found his popularity surging, even as it fed the flames of righteous outrage in others. This continued for 10 years, while Darius grew increasingly infamous, and then, as suddenly as his nightmares had begun, all at once, they stopped. Vermina's time was up, you see. It was now Sheogorath's turn to play with poor Darius. Darius was relieved that his night terrors had finally ceased, but he was confused as well. He wondered what had changed to make his mistress Vermina forsake him. He made heartfelt prayers to her, pleading for just a sliver of the inspiration she had once bestowed upon him. No answer ever came, and Darius's devastating nightly horrors faded away into long, empty periods of deep, dreamless sleep. In time, the ever-present self-doubt every artist feels, no matter how inspired their work, surfaced in Darius's pieces. With it came bitterness and cynicism, as his goddess continued to ignore his supplications. As the prose and imagery in his work grew stale, interest, however contentious, in Darius Shano's work began to decline. His abandonment by Vermina had led him to a place where he could no longer provoke the outrage and indignation he once had. As his notoriety began to fade, his resentment increased, directed at the muse who had forsaken him. Sacrilege was close behind, and in short order, hatred followed. This manifested as sarcastic ridicule, then finally disbelief, as Darius came to believe his mistress Vermina had never truly spoken to him at all. It had been in his mind all along, the ravings of a lonely, maladjusted man. His shame and anger and guilt were overwhelming. The man who had once touched the heart of a deity slowly drifted away into irreverent disrespect and even heresy. As Darius's desperation grew, so did the intentionally outrageous behavior in his subsequent work. He became purposely offensive, trying in vain to approach his former infamy. He focused on the gods, challenging their might, and mocking them obscenely. He dared them to strike him down for his blasphemy, and insulted them all the more when no such punishment appeared. More, he targeted public figures, officials, and even his adoring public, skewering them with venomous caricatures, sparing none and attacking all. His audience, for their part, hated him all the more, meeting his attacks with ever more indignation, for while he had once assaulted their sensibilities, he now struck directly at their hearts and insulted their very spirit. Before long, he had committed his final offense by scorning the emperor-god Tiber Septim in the piece he called "The Noblest Fool." He mocked the divine emperor for his integration into the cult of the 9 divines. After 20 years, Darius's fate was sealed. The king of the high rock city of Dania, who had been sullied by this insignificant worm on more than one occasion, seized this opportunity. For the offense of sacrilege against the empire, Darius's throat was slit with a ceremonial knife, and his final gurgling words spewed forth on a torrent of black blood. The crowds cheered his demise, for they hated him. 20 years after their initial wager, Vermina and Sheogorath met again over the headless, blood-stained corpse of the artist Darius Shano. The Dreamweaver was livid, for in the name of their wager she had tormented the mortal endlessly for 10 years, yet Sheogorath, on the other hand, had spoken to him not once. "Nonsense!" croaked the gentleman with the cane. For Sheogorath had been by his side all along. He had replaced Vermina's subtle whispers with absolute, deafening silence. Darius Shano had been cut off completely from that which gave him comfort and meaning. For 10 long years, Sheogorath denied the artist the attention he had craved so desperately, the attention of a god. Without Vermina's dreams to guide him, Shano had been cast adrift, and his rage had ripened under the withering heat of hate and resentment. Before his death, Darius was a madman. This artist, who was once Vermina's most prized mortal, now served Sheogorath as his servant, bound forever to the Shivering Isles. And thus did Sheogorath teach Vermina that without madness there are no dreams and no creation. It is said Vermina has never forgotten this lesson. Vermina is the Daedric prince of dreams and nightmares, and it is she from whom evil omens issue forth. Referred to as Vermina the Gifter and the Dreamweaver, she is seen as one of the most demonic of Daedric lords. Scholars have claimed that her sphere of influence is connected to psychological torture. She has been historically associated with Molag Bal in regards to a cure for the curse of vampirism, though the details of the connection is as of yet unknown. Vermina's place of oblivion is known as Quagmire. It is a realm of nightmares made flesh, where reality shifts regularly, and each random incarnation is more horrifying than the last. It is the realm most easily accessible by mortals, who enter by way of their dreams, but usually forget the experience upon waking. From her citadel in the center of Quagmire, Vermina touches sleeping mortal minds, collecting memories, and leaving foreboding impressions of despair and horror in her wake. It has been said that after a truly memorable encounter with Vermina in the realm of Quagmire, nothing unknown can ever frighten a mortal again, for nothing could be as horrific as being in the presence of the Dreamweaver. It is conceivably possible to enter Quagmire while awake, by means of magical teleportation, but the dangers associated with it make it an impractical avenue for most mortals to pursue. There have been times when Quagmire and Mundus have appeared to merge, during times when Vermina's influence has been particularly strong or where her artifacts have been in close proximity. The Skull of Corruption is Vermina's primary artifact. Appearing to be a staff, the Skull of Corruption creates a duplicate of whomever or whatever it is cast upon, This copy then attacks the original for the sake of the wielder. It is rumored that the staff can feed on the memories of those around it, and sometimes will act of its own accord. Vermina presides over the world of dreams, and speaks to all mortals at some point in their lives. For some she provides inspiration, while others cringe in horror at the merest mention of her name. Her night terrors lay bare the darkest aspects of the mortal mind, leaving even the bravest among men and mer to tremble at the revelations revealed. Those who follow Vermina know that the mortal mind is like clay, and very easily molded. Many are eternally changed after the Dreamweaver touches them, released from the grip of fear forevermore. But while Vermina controls the insubstantial world of dreams, there are others who control the darkness of the true and waking world. He is the Daedric prince of hedonism, and is allied with Vermina as the depths of the mortal soul reveal themselves in the dark desires of the mortal heart. The Daedric prince gives voice to the deep and hidden impulses some mortals will only acknowledge in their dreams. Chapter the 15th. Sanguine and Clavicus Vile. When summoning a Daedric prince, certain offerings are sometimes required. In this case, orc's blood, hist sap, the horn of unicorn, ectoplasm, and the heart of the Daedra. Some say gold works just as well. Perform the summoning correctly, and just maybe an Oblivion gate appears. Step through, and Tamriel is left behind. But this Daedric realm isn't like the others. It isn't dark and ominous, its skies aren't filled with ash, and its ground isn't covered in hellfire. Here there is soft grass, green pastures, and a leafy countryside. This is his domain, and all at once is there, lounging by a tree stump, with his shape-shifting dog Barbas by his side. His name is Clavicus Vile, and he is the Daedric prince of granted wishes, who barters souls by way of dark rituals. While not considered evil in the way of Daedric lords like Sheogorath or Molag Bal, Clavicus Vile still revels in mischief and meddles in the affairs of mortals to keep himself amused. Cyrus the Red God had carved his way to Clavicus Vile's realm of oblivion to challenge Vile for the soul of his sister. Ultimately, Cyrus engaged the Daedric prince not in physical combat, but in a battle of wits and cunning. Clavicus Vile smirked as he lost. Realizing the person in front of him hadn't been just a sword-swinging hero, Vile had been outsmarted. But at least he wasn't bored. He hates being bored. In the past, Clavicus Vile has worked through mortal representatives to achieve his own ends. It has been rumored that it was he who taught the Cyrodiil Vampirum Order to control their bloodlust and live quietly amongst their mortal prey. The hound often seen with Clavicus Vile is a shape-shifting Daedra named Barbas. Some scholars believe Barbas holds half of all of Clavicus Vile's power, and that without him, Vile is noticeably weaker. While he appears to be obedient to Clavicus Vile, Barbas often acts of his own inclinations. He has in the past warned people of Vile's plots, and has at times taken an active hand in stopping the plans of the Daedric prince. At one time, Barbas's affection for the hero Cyrus led him to assume the Red Guard's face on his canine body. Barbas has used his shape-shifting abilities in the past to appear as a scamp, or even as a statue of a dog to hinder his master's plans. It's important to remember that this shape-shifting ability isn't exclusive to Barbas. Every Daedric prince is believed to change their appearance at will. Barbas just seems to exercise this ability more than most. Clavicus Vile has bestowed upon the world of Nirn numerous artifacts, such as the obscure Bitter Cup and the Rueful Axe. The Rueful Axe is a Daedric weapon created as a sinister solution to a conjurer's dilemma. As the tale goes, Sebastian Lort's daughter had become a worshipper of the Daedric prince Hircine, and had been afflicted with lycanthropy as a result. After praying to Clavicus Vile to cure his daughter, the prince bestowed upon him the rueful axe, a battle axe capable of slaying his werewolf child. What better cure is there than death? The Umbra sword is an artifact commissioned by Clavicus Vile for the purpose of allowing him to collect the mortal souls he craves. The sword was crafted by an ancient witch, who used part of Vile's own power on the sword and then tricked the Daedric prince. A portion of Clavicus Vile's power didn't return to him once the Umbra sword was complete. Vile had wanted the sword in order to create chaos along with its enchantment to trap souls, and that was precisely what he got. The piece of Daedric power that had been confined within the sword became sentient, calling itself Umbra. The witch who crafted this deadly blade was executed, but not before hiding Umbra. When found, the weapon would slowly take control of the wielder, driving them to a bloodthirsty frenzy. In time, and despite Barbas's best efforts, Umbra found its way back to Clavicus Vile's nameless realm, a woodland island that holds horrific yellow Daedra. Clavicus Vile trapped Umbra within the walls of his realm. Still, the sword in its incarnation would ultimately hurl itself back to Mundus to once again drive mortals to madness. Clavicus Vile may suffer the weakness of having part of his power separated from him, but still he laughs as he gleefully collects his souls, delighted in the mayhem his artifact creates. Though this prince boasts many artifacts, his most notable is an enchanted helm known as the Mask of Clavicus Vile. The mask's power lies in its ability to enhance the personality of any who wears it, regardless of other factors. Like so many other Daedric artifacts, it is fickle and given to abandoning those who use it. It is said that Vile's vanity played a large part in the creation of the mask, and that it suits his personality well. The most popular story regarding the Mask of Clavicus Vile is that of the noblewoman Ayleid. Scarred terribly as a child, she made a dark pact with Vile in return for the mask. While her face remained disfigured, her allure and appeal compelled all those around her. She had been married but a year and a day to a wealthy baron before Clavicus Vile reclaimed his mask. Her wealthy husband cast her out, even as she was with child. After 21 years and a day, the baron was dead, slain by the daughter he had conceived with the spurned Ayleid. Such is the dark fate that awaits nearly all those who deal with Clavicus Vile. The very nature of Clavicus Vile means he shares a connection with another Daedric prince. Vile grants wishes, and Sanguine represents the dark place in the heart of mortals from which those desires spring forth. Sanguine is the Daedric prince of hedonism, debauchery, and vice. He is typically depicted as a short, horned man, often seen holding wine or beer, and is considered to be the patron saint of sinners, a prankster at heart. Sanguine revels in uproar and confusion, such as when he arranged to have a spell delivered to a dinner party hosted by the Countess of Leawin. The Daedric prince had a spell cast on the Countess, rendering her and all her guests quite naked. Sanguine was beside himself with glee, and rewarded his operative with the Sanguine Rose. His artifact, the Sanguine Rose, has taken many forms over the years, but mostly it is seen as a wooden staff carved like a rose. While its power is undeniable, few care to use the weapon. The staff summons a lesser Daedra, who will attack all but the holder of the Sanguine Rose. The creature is uncontrollable and will kill with recklessness, but like all conjured Daedra, it will ultimately return to oblivion. It is said each time the rose is used, one of its petals falls off, and once all of the petals have fallen away, the staff's power is depleted. Once finished, a new sanguine rose blooms somewhere in Oblivion, presumably in one of the many realms governed by sanguine. Most of these realms are apparently used as pleasure pockets by the Daedric Lord of Decadence and Vice, but very little is actually known about them. Scholars say the rose was once given to and possessed by Martin Septim himself, the same Martin Septim who stood against the onslaught of the Oblivion crisis, a crisis brought on by yet another Daedric prince who has no desire to toy with silly mortals. His only desire is reign and ruin. He is change incarnate, and the embodiment of destruction and bloodshed. This prince brought about the end of an era, and almost claimed all of Nirn as his own dominion. Chapter the 16th, Mehrunes Dagon. Emperor Uriel Septim VII knew he was going to die, yet still he ran. First it had been his 3 sons, methodically brought down by assassins, one after the other. Then came the attack on the Emperor himself, killers donning red robes, who had infiltrated the white gold tower with murder in their eyes. Uriel continued to run, with his bodyguards, the fiercely loyal blades surrounding him, though he knew it was to no avail. The Emperor was strangely calm, for he had dreamt of this moment, and knew this was his time. Death was coming for the Emperor of Cyrodiil. Soon, only one of his bodyguards remained, Bowders, and Uriel would be cut off from him as well, as he met his end at the point of an executioner's dagger. The Septim bloodline was ending, and a new day was dawning, thanks to the assassins who summoned this chaos. These killers would greet the new day with open arms, for they are the mythic Dawn, devoted followers of the Daedric prince, Mehrunes Dagon. To best understand the Prince of Destruction and his Oblivion crisis, one needs to go back to the beginning of this story. In times long past, the human races were suffering greatly under the iron will of the Ayleids. The fledgling mortals were dominated and enslaved by the elves who worshipped the Daedric princes. It was Saint Alessia, the first queen of the Cyrodiils, who knelt alone and begged the great and mighty Akatosh for help. Akatosh was the dragon god of time and the leader of the Daedra, they who were the offspring of the 2 primal forces of existence. Noble Akatosh looked down with pity on the misery of these tiny creatures. The dragon god drew blood from his own heart and used it to anoint this remarkable woman, she who was called Paravant the First. Thus, a holy covenant was sealed. The dragon fires were the symbol of that covenant, and could only be lit by the mystical Amulet of Kings. According to legend, the enchanted amulet could not be used or even worn by anyone not descended of Alessia. With Uriel Septim dead, the bloodline of the Cyrodiilic Empire was severed, and the Amulet of Kings could not be used to relight the dragon fires. The veil separating Oblivion and Mundus would now be torn asunder, and the monstrous jaws of Oblivion would open wide. Mankar Cameron, leader of the cult of the mythic Dawn, knew this. He intended to open those hellish gates and offer all of Nirn to his infernal lord, Mehrunes Dagon. As the dragon fires grew cold, the barrier between Oblivion and Mundus grew thin. Soon great gates would open, and Nirn would be taken by Daedric forces. Wholesale slaughter in the name of Dagon would finally commence. Mehrunes Dagon is the Daedric prince of destruction and change, and his spheres of influence are revolution, energy, and ambition. It is no surprise he would seek to bring Nirn to its knees. It is in his very nature. In fact, he has on several occasions attempted to conquer Nirn, to claim it as his own. Mehrunes Dagon is also associated with dangerous natural phenomena, which marks him as part of the Dunmer House of Troubles. His connection to flood, fire, and earthquakes are seen by the Dunmer as important elements at work in Morrowind. As such, Dagon is a vitally important deity to the Dark Elves. For all others, however, he is simply the prince of bloodshed and betrayal. His name means death, for any who hear it. One of Mehrunes Dagon's most memorable acts of devastation came when the resentful spymaster Vivek summoned Dagon for the sake of taking vengeance upon the Duke of Morrowind. Mehrunes Dagon revelled in the annihilation of Morrowind's capital city of Mournhold. By the time the tribunal gods Almalexia and Sothisil managed to drive Dagon back to his realm of oblivion, the Duke of Morrowind was dead, and the capital city of Mournhold was levelled. Dagon's realm of oblivion is appropriately named the Deadlands, and is a terrible place of fiery red skies, seas of lava, and immense grinding engines of torture and death. Mutilated corpses hang from crumbling bridges, and the stench of sulphur and blood fills the air. Towers loom overhead with even more ruined bodies bound to them. Lurking clanfear and vicious scamps prowl amidst lethal spittle plants and harrider roots, while the kin oversee all, looking for mortal lives to take. The kin, or Dremora, as they are more commonly known, are monstrous humanoid knights. With horrific horned faces and bearing the strongest of Daedric armor and weapons, these crimson fiends exist solely to serve Dagon and to kill all others. Mehrunes Dagon has given 3 artifacts to the world of Nirn, and each one is increasingly more potent and dangerous than the last. The Daedric Crescent Blade was designed by Mehrunes Dagon and is a fearsome double-bladed weapon that can paralyze its target and corrode the heaviest armor. It was designed for Dagon's Daedric forces, which used them as they sacked the battle spire. There were once a great many crescent blades, but when Imperial armies retook the Battle Mage Academy, the blades were gathered up and destroyed. One of the weapons managed to survive, however, and was rumored to be possessed by the Reverine of the Third Era. What ultimately became of this unique and powerful blade is at this time unknown. Mehrunes' Razor is an ebony dagger crafted by Dagon and capable of killing with a single blow. The souls of those killed by the Daedric artifact are often claimed by Mehrunes Dagon himself. Also called the Bane of the Righteous and Kingslayer, the weapon has been present at times of horrific murder and betrayal. It is believed the razor played a role in the near destruction of the Dark Brotherhood. Once the Oblivion Crisis ran its course, a group pledged to the dismantling of the mythic Dawn cult happened upon Mehrunes' razor in a way not clearly known. The group broke the deadly weapon into 3 fragments and distributed them between the 3 highest among the group's inner circle. The pieces were to be handed down from descendant to descendant to ensure that the dagger could never be reassembled. In the 4th Era, a man named Silas Vesuvius tried to collect the pieces for a museum devoted to the mythic Dawn cult. He had already acquired the razor's sheath and would have seen all the pieces displayed together, disregarding the profound threat they implied. It is unknown at this time if Vesuvius was successful in his attempt to reunite the pieces of Mehrunes' razor. It is possible that Vesuvius, like so many others, met his doom in a vain attempt to avoid the evil influence of the dagger. The Mysterium Xarxes is a book written by Dagon himself, and is an artifact of profound strength and immense evil. The malevolence of the book is so powerful, in fact, even opening it requires magical shielding for the good of the reader. Mehrunes Dagon gave the book to Mankar Cameron, his most ardent and loyal worshipper. Upon reading it, Mankar was able to open a portal to a new plane of oblivion he called Gaiar Alata, or Paradise. Paradise was believed to be a place of rapture and utopia for those true to Mehrunes Dagon. To die serving the prince meant your soul would find rest there. This was true for Mankar Cameron only. For all others, Paradise was a place of endless, horrific torment. Those souls who had followed Cameron found they were nothing more than the prey and the playthings of Dagon's Daedric servants. The Daedric prince, Mehrunes Dagon, nearly took all of Nirn for his own. His artifacts, even the single scorched page of the Mysterium Xarxes that remains, still hold power enough to kill any who would dare to divine their secrets. If Mehrunes Dagon represents the infernal chaos of Oblivion, there is another who represents its order. Where Dagon seeks to reign death and destruction, this prince seeks to assimilate through logic and directive. He is the Daedric prince of...
Stop! 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 No further! Stop!
My lord Sheogorath, you're here? You're actually here?
Ah, you would do it again, wouldn't you? It's not bad enough. You torture us with prattling on about that great foreign buffoon Dagon. Ha! Oh, now you'd inflict such agony upon us again with another one of those great Daedric stiffs. Oh, enough! Better to die of 1,000,000 cuts. Oh, wait, no, 1,000,000 kittens. Ha ha! Yes, have you ever drowned in kittens? Oh, it's so much worse than drowning in grown cats. The allergies alone. Oh, our dogs. Oh, no, lions, tigers, or even bears. Oh, my. Oh, my. And you know, I should know.
My most brilliant and illustrious Lord Sheogorath, Prince of Madness, please forgive your pitiful servant. I did not nor ever meant to offend you. I live to serve. When you appeared to me some time ago and told me to murder the other storyteller, I gladly poisoned his sweet roll in your name. Ever since then, I've been spinning stories for these puny mortals. Why, just the other day I told them how you tricked that harlot, Vermina. Oh, and I also told them about the time...
Oh, listen to that buttery voice, so silky, so golden. Reminds me of cheese. There, you're cheese now, so shut up. Stop talking. But dear friends, lend me your ears, or your eyes, or your livers. I'm making a stew, you see. It's gonna be delicious. And while I cook, I'll regale you with tales of madness, mania, lunacy, and utter dementia. Oh, the times we'll have! I'll be in charge of the whole thing. Me, Sheogorath, the one, the only, except no substitutes. Oh, and maybe Haskell will be there too. You know he loves telling stories.
Chapter the 17th. Sheogorath.
I want to tell you a story. And no, I don't have to go back to the beginning. I don't have to. I'm a prince, and a prince does what he wants. Oh, and I want you to listen closely. Unless, of course, you'd rather I knit your entrails into a lovely sweater, a festive, colorful, blood-soaked sweater made of your own innards. Ha! Lovely, perfect for a party. Oh, you'd be the envy of disemboweled bodies everywhere.
What my liege means to say is, he has decided to recount his tale to you, and will be most displeased should you choose not to give him your undivided attention.
That's what I meant. Thank you.
Yes, my lord, I live to serve. In the interest of moving things along, as some of you may be rather limited, I will assume responsibility for the duration of this story. My name is Haskell. I am chamberlain to the Daedric Lord Sheogorath, the mad god, the gentleman with a cane, and the prince of madness, he whose sphere is insanity, and motives are known to him and him alone, supposedly. The tale of how Sheogorath came to be lies in the story of another Daedric lord, Jiggalag, the prince of order and logic.
Oh, Jiggalag! Are you actually talking about him now? Boring! Ha ha! That's right, another bore. He'd have been oh so much more interesting if he actually had udders, with horns, and then cloven hooves like, any other boar. Also, a little curly tail. Oh, that would be adorable.
Yes, as I was saying, because of his sphere of influence, Jiggalag was the fundamental master of deductive reasoning, and is rumored to have known everything that has ever happened and everything that will ever occur. For Jiggalag, never was there any doubt or uncertainty, only facts, only truth. So great and so boundless was his might, that it is said he was feared and even hated by the other Daedric lords. In their mutual resentment, the Daedric princes banded together and soundly defeated Jiggalag. But even while he lay broken and vanquished, they were not yet done. The Daedric lords placed a curse on the Prince of Order, the most terrible fate they could dream up for a prince who had embodied the highest peaks of judgment and rationale. Jiggalag was damned to live on as the personification of the deepest depths of insanity. Where once there had stood the essence of reason, inescapable logic, and the limitless reaches of systematic deduction, there was now only gibbering lunacy and the feverish visions of the hopelessly deranged. In their fervor to destroy one god, the princes had inadvertently created another, and thus was born the Lord of the Never-There, Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness. Sheogorath's Plane of Oblivion is called the Shivering Isles, and like the madness it embodies, it is a realm divided. The land of mania is a vivid and intensely colorful region where the denizens are given to bouts of great imagination and creativity. Meanwhile, haughty servants of Sheogorath, known as Golden Saints, maintain what laughably passes as peace and civility. They also enforce Lord Sheogorath's policies and directives. This means you troublesome adventurers can't meander lawlessly in our realm as you are so inclined on doing. While the residents of Mania boast great inspiration and relish in the imperceptible spark that drives them to create and to conceive, they are still quite irredeemably mad. Like the mad god himself, they are most unpredictable, and as such, extremely dangerous. The land of dementia represents the dark, unseen side of madness, where psychopathy and paranoia reign supreme, even while hidden away from all eyes. The denizens are gloomy, fearful, and trustful of no one. It is a place of shadows and pain, where surprisingly patient dark seducers preserve proper peace. Between the two realms lies the palace of Sheogorath at New Sheoth, the seat of my lord's authority. It is here that I personally am most comfortable. The outer realms are inhospitable, to say nothing of that dreadful fringe. This is the Shivering Isles.
Ah, the Shivering Isles. Home, sweet home. 'Tis the most interesting of locales. True inspiration for those with eyes to see. And even eyes that have been sucked right out of their sockets. Now, as long as they're attached to you, you can still enjoy the view. And what a view it is. From Execution Point, you can see the rest of your life. The rest of your life! Oh, there's a concept. You mortals and your lifespans. I get so bored living forever. Without your finite lives to fiddle with, I shudder to think of the dullness. It's so good to know that when the monotony of eternal life grows insufferably dull, I have you short-lived lot to spice things up. I toss an artifact or two onto the mortal realm, and the hilarity begins. Oh, you insects are so quick to start hurting each other, even your adoring fans. Oh, him, and they say I'm mad.
As my lord implies, the artifacts of Sheogorath are as uniquely distinctive as he is, and most are intended to bring sport and amusement to the Prince of Madness. The fork of horripilation appears to be a mundane iron fork and tends to function as one, but when used as a weapon, which Sheogorath appears to enjoy forcing mortals to do, it will stunt a user's magical abilities, or drain them completely. As one would expect, this can pose a danger of the highest order, and it brings no end of delight to my lord. A most brilliant comedic masterpiece indeed, my liege. But with your indulgence, I shall endeavour to continue despite my helplessness in the face of your monumental wit, sir. The Staff of Everscamp is another of Sheogorath's artifacts that appears to serve no purpose other than to torment whoever holds it. Once the engraved inscription on the staff is read aloud, 4 scamps appear, and while the creatures are not harmful, they smell as horrendously as all other scamps. Sheogorath laughs mightily as the beasts proceed to make a complete shambles of the bearer's life. Among my lord Sheogorath's most notorious artifacts is the staff known only as Wobberjack.
Oh, you like that, don't you? Oh, you mortals, you don't shut up about it. Wabba-jack this, wabba-jack that. Wabba, 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 wabba-jack. I'll turn the next one to pick it up into mammoth cheese. Lovely. And then I'll feed it to Haskell when he starts looking.
I shudder at the thought, my lord. To continue, the wabba-jack has extremely unpredictable effects, making it essentially useless for the adventurer who likes to know what spell they are casting before they cast it. While the staff can be useful, should it turn an opponent into a mud crab, it is equally capable of turning a troublesome imp into a soul-hungry lich. Or worse, the outcomes are utterly random and, of course, completely uncontrollable, as is my lord. Of course, there are other artifacts attributed to the Prince of Madness, but I grow tired of reciting stories for a mortal mind clearly unable to contain them all, so I'll simply tell you of the Mad God's most crucial artifact, the Staff of Sheogorath. This unusual cane functions as the very core of the Shivering Isles. While it can be seen as a simple walking stick, albeit with an eyeball at the top, the staff is vitally important, for it is necessary for Sheogorath himself to sit upon the throne of madness. And it is with this artifact that the tale of my lord reaches its climax. There is a time, you see, when the staff of Sheogorath becomes just a useless piece of wood. It is during the time of the Grey March. When the Daedric lords cursed Jiggalag to live as Sheogorath, they also decreed that once an era he should return, to destroy all that the Mad God had created in his time. The Shivering Isles are torn asunder by the forces of order, and those who betray Sheogorath in favor of embracing Jiggalag's logic are reborn as priests of order. This terrible cycle has continued for millennia and will come again. At some point the Grey March must return, Jiggalag will rise, and how Lord Sheogorath will choose to approach this threat is his alone to know. Thus ends the tale of my liege. Wherever he leads, I will stand at his side, for I am Haskell, the chamberlain of the great Mad God. It is who I am, and all I shall ever be. Now, please, I have duties to which I must attend, rather more important than talking with the likes of you, I'm sure. The Grey March is at hand, after all.
Yes, let the Grey March come. I'll be me before he is me, and then I'll be me again. It'll always exist, because madness will always exist. Even if I'm not me, I'll still be me, because there must be a me for me to be me, or is it we? Ha! What chaos! What disorder! Oh, what absolute bedlam! Why, such confusion could very well drive a person quite mad. Haskell, bring me something to drink. And you, thanks for watching with those lovely eyes of yours. In fact, you know, I just may take those for myself.
You've reached the end of this audiobook. On behalf of all the creators here at the Shoddycast, we thank you for your contributions. This audiobook was brought to you by loyal Patreon donors like you, and by writer Zane Panach, narrator Jose Neto of AE Voices, lore consultant Lady Nerevar. Special thanks to developer Bethesda, not only for their genre-defining RPG franchise, but for their open support of our lore series. Watch the Elder Scrolls lore series on YouTube at youtube.com/Shoddycast.